Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Senate Committee on Commerce and Labor for the 81st legislative session. Before we begin, please be sure to mute your microphone when you are not speaking to minimize the background noise. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senator Hardy. Senator Hardy.
Here.
Senator Lang.
Here.
Senator Neal.
Here.
Senator Pickard.
Here.
Senator Scheibel.
Here.
Senator Settlemeyer.
Here.
Chair Spearman.
Here. Thank you. Let the record show that all committee members are present. Before we begin, let's take care of a couple of housekeeping items. And I want to first of all thank those who are joining us remotely and anyone else who might be listening over the internet. Today we have a presentation on the work of the Department of Employment, Training, and Rehabilitation and a hearing on SB 75 on the agenda. In terms of housekeeping, here's some basic things that I'd like for us to adhere to. As you know, the legislative building is currently closed as a public safety measure to reduce the spread and infection rate of COVID-19. It's closed to the public, and so all committee meetings will be held virtually, meaning that committee members, staff, and everyone else will participate either through Zoom, video conference, or by telephone. I think this is probably a more accessible way for the public to participate because there's no travel involved. All you have to do is turn on your computer and watch and sign up. So there are various ways that you can do that. We'd like for you to engage or participate through, number one, in all previous sessions, all committee-related information is available on Nellis. This is accessible from the legislature's website. 4 ways to engage the committee, and these include registering to participate in a committee meeting through the new system on Nellis, which places you in line to testify on a bill or provide public comment during a meeting. 2, submitting written comment to the committee email address or fax number listed on the agenda. Sharing your opinion. Share your opinion via the legislature's opinion application on Nellis or by viewing committee meetings online through Nellis on the legislature's YouTube channel. During the 2021 legislative session, to testify on a bill or provide public comment, members of the public must first register for the meeting. Register for the meeting you would like to participate in. Committee members are listed in the several places on Nellis, and to register, simply click on the participate button near the meeting date and time. Then fill in the required information, such as your name, the agenda item you're interested in, and your position on the bill. Once your registration is submitted, you will see a confirmation screen, and you will also receive an email with a phone number and meeting ID to call at the time of the meeting. Just a note that while meeting registration is required to participate, it does not guarantee you will be able to speak. Similar to previous sessions, comment and public comment may be limited due to time constraints. And so at the beginning, I will announce the time frame for each segment. That's how many minutes we will spend on for, against, and neutral. It will be helpful for you or your organization when you comment to remember that ditto is a response when someone has already covered your points. This will also allow more people to comment during that time frame. When you are on the phone line, please pay attention to which bill is being considered and follow the verbal prompts provided by BPS staff. This is so that you will know which keys to press to raise your hand or unmute yourself. Staff will call on you to speak by the last 3 digits of your phone number. Detailed instructions for participating in committee meetings are also available on the help page, which is linked in the banner at the top of every page on Nellis. If you need assistance with any of these processes, or if you would like to receive electronic notification of the committee's agendas and meetings, please contact our committee manager at the committee email listed on the agenda. Any exhibits for the committee must be submitted in electronic format no later than 8:00 a.m. the day before the meeting to our committee manager, Terry Miller, or our committee policy analyst, Cesar Megarejo. Committee contact information may be found on the committee page in Nellis. In addition, any person proposing an amendment to a bill being heard by the committee must first talk to the sponsor and let them know you intend to submit an amendment. Let me be clear. I will not entertain any amendments if the bill sponsor is not aware of the amendment. The proposed amendment must be submitted in writing 24 hours prior to the meeting. Please include the bill number, a statement of intent, and your contact information. When testifying, please remember to unmute your microphone and clearly state your name and the entity you represent at the beginning of your testimony. Speak clearly and project your voice to ensure those watching remotely can hear your testimony. This is particularly important for many of our the public who are watching and who might be hearing impaired. So please speak clearly, get close to your mic so that everyone can hear. And remember to turn your microphone off when you finish. A reminder to all those who testify pursuant to Nevada Revised Statute NRS 218E.085, it is unlawful for a person to knowingly misrepresent facts when testifying before a legislative committee. A person who knowingly does so is guilty of a misdemeanor. The chair and members may request any testifier to submit documentation supporting their testimony. To committee members, during these virtual meetings, when an agenda item calls for a vote, our committee will be using roll call to do so. When the committee secretary calls your name, please answer with a yes or no so that there is no confusion. Also, if you have a question, please raise your hand through the Zoom application. And you can find that at the bottom of your screen. If you go to more and go over to reaction, you'll see the raise your hand function. That will allow us to see who is ready to ask a question or who wants to make a comment. And finally, all exhibits received prior to the meeting will be available on Nellis online. So today, we'll have an overview of the Department of Employment Training and Rehabilitation, and our presenter is Alyssa Caffaretta, Director. Let us start with a presentation from the Department of Employment Training and Rehabilitation. We are ready when you are. Thank you.
Good morning. Can you hear us all right?
We can hear you.
Excellent. All right. And can you see our slides?
And see
No.
this yet?
Not yet. All right. We will get the slides up with the help of the broadcasting team, I think.
If broadcast could open up the slides, show the slides.
And while we're doing that, for the record, my name is Alyssa Caffaretta. I'm the Director of the Department of Employment Training and Rehabilitation, or DETR, as we know it. I'm joined today, just going around the room. Dave Schmidt is our Chief Economist. Troy Jordan is our Senior Legal Counsel for the Employment Security Division. Jeff Frischman is the former Deputy Administrator for the Employment Security Division. He's back with us as a consultant and a subject matter expert in unemployment. Jenny Castleman is our Deputy Director, and Chris Sewell is our Chief Operations Officer and Legislative Liaison. I'm trying to read Senator Settlemeyer's note, but I can't read it from here.
Good morning, Ms. Caffaretta. This is Felicia in broadcast. If you begin sharing your presentation, would you please stop sharing it, close it, and let's try to restart it. So
Okay.
Close it. You can have it opened and minimized and utilize the green share screen function. Fantastic. I see you've started it and it is full screen.
All right, thank you. We had quite a bit of technical difficulty, so we thought that might be a little more complicated than just hitting one button. The team that came early is really getting their work out. And we really appreciate Broadcast Services for walking us through this whole thing. So we're going to give you a brief overview of Dieter this morning because we know you're quite familiar with some of our work. And we just wanted to make sure you sort of had a holistic picture as there are several programs that we run. And we just want you to be aware of those and what we've been working on over the year beyond what's been in the headlines. So we can go to the next slide, which will show you our vision and mission. Pretty much what we've always said is Dieter is traditionally been known as Nevada's lead workforce agency. Our goal is to empower a vibrant and equitable workforce and economy. And we do that by empowering Nevadans to realize their potential through meaningful work and building economic prosperity in every community through our major programs, which are employment security, rehabilitation, and the Nevada Equal Rights Commission. And on the next slide, you'll see really what, if you don't remember our vision and mission verbatim, what we really want you to understand is that all of our divisions have a workforce focus. So at the core, what we're doing is trying to help Nevadans get jobs and help businesses find the workers that they need. So on the next chart, you'll see our organizational chart for Dieter. Here you can see the 3 divisions that we have, which we outlined before. And just want to take a moment to let you know that we also have 4 units in our administrative branch, which really do an amazing job of keeping us going. We couldn't do the work of the divisions without the support of our financial management office, information development and processes, which is what most folks traditionally think of as IT, research and analysis, and human resources. Just to give you a very high level, and I promise I won't read these to you, the divisions that we have at a high level, the Nevada Equal Rights Commission, I believe many of you are familiar with. It is the only state mandated training and enforcement commission that is monitoring equal opportunity compliance for Nevadans. So the laws that you pass about equal rights and equal opportunities are investigated and enforced by NERC. The Research and Analysis Division is a unit has contract with the Department of Labor to provide labor market information, which many of you have seen, I am sure, and you'll hear a little bit more from them a little bit later. On the next slide, the Rehabilitation Division is focused again on employment opportunities, removing barriers for people with disabilities to find meaningful employment. And there are several programs in the Rehabilitation Division, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well, but you may be familiar with some of these specifically. And finally, what we sort of have been a little bit more well known for in the last year is our Employment Security Division, which has 3 major programs: workforce development, unemployment insurance, and the Commission on Post-Secondary Education. So with the theme music, we're going to go into our highlights from 2020 and take a look at really what went right. I know many of you have seen updates or seen news articles about what we've been doing, but we really have tried to take a step back now that 2020 is over and sort of look back and get our arms around what happened. And as I said, what we accomplished and what went right. Because we have spent most of our time talking about unemployment, just wanted to make sure we gave a little bit of love to the other divisions that really sort of allowed us to do our work by continuing on with their work and without the need for a whole lot of time and attention from the leadership team here. So in rehabilitation, the highlights from 2020 are that 529 people were successfully employed in 2020 as a result of our programs, with average wages that increased to $13.40 an hour. We're very proud of the fact that we were the first state to bring our applications online to virtual setting, and we are able to provide many of our services online for people with disabilities. It was something we were moving toward before the pandemic. And of course, as with many other programs, it sort of provided the catalyst to make these services available virtually, which for people with disabilities has been very helpful. About 25,000 people were served disability benefits, and over $1.3 billion went out to Nevadans who are beneficiaries of the Social Security disability programs last year. On the next slide, you'll see that the Equal Rights Commission received over 1,600 complaints and was able to close over 600 of those discrimination charges on the behalf of Nevadans. This program too went virtual with its training for employers, and we have been providing guidance on COVID-related discrimination, getting a lot of questions from employers and employees. And over $2 million in settlement funds has gone to Nevadans through those programs. We expect the NERC to be providing guidance soon on vaccines for employers. So it's an important commission that provides a lot of information for employers and a lot of training as they need it and as the situation has changed. The Research and Analysis Office, the state economists have been called on many times in the last year to provide insights on sort of the magnitude of the pandemic in terms of the economy and employment and unemployment rates, some of which you'll hear a little bit later in this program. And again, the support programs of financial management, IDP, PIO, and HR really kept everything else going. So we're giving them a little love this morning as well. On to the Employment Security Division and sort of what happened in unemployment in 2020. A lot of which you've heard, but again, we just want to take the opportunity to kind of put the whole year in perspective for you. I think a lot of you have seen this slide or some variation of it probably already in presentations you've seen in the legislature. When the pandemic hit, unemployment immediately went to over 30% in Nevada, which is the highest percent of any state ever in the history of unemployment tracking. So what that looked like in our workload was an immediate change to the amount of work that the unemployment system was doing. So we went from about 20,000 benefit payments per week to over 369,000 benefit payments in a week, which is a 20-fold increase in unemployment claims. You can see the sort of gentle sloping bunny hill, as I call it, to the left of the spike. That was the Great Recession of 2009. And just one feature to note about it, and we're going to go to another slide so you can kind of get the real historic perspective, but there was a much more gradual increase in the number of unemployment claims and then a long decrease as people went back to work. So the agency in the last recession had much more time to ramp up and respond to the situation. That certainly was not the case with the pandemic. The committee did ask for information about how this pandemic and the unemployment we've seen compared to previous recessions. You can see this chart goes back
1990.
to 1990. So you can, I don't know if you can read it, but the 1991 oil shock and Gulf War, the 9/11 stock market crash, and then the housing crash and a Great Recession compared to the pandemic of 2020. So nothing even comes close to the magnitude of unemployment claims that we saw last year. And this chart shows you the initial claims, so the sort of spike on a weekly basis that we might have seen. The next slide shows you the same period of time, but continued claims. So this is week in, week out, how many claims for benefits did we get? You can see that the Great Recession was pretty significant in comparison to the previous two recessions. But we are still at very high levels with COVID. And I think once we get out of this situation, the number of claims, continued claims on a week over week basis will be significantly higher than what we saw in the Great Recession. And we'll come back to these slides later with a little bit more, with a little closer look at the last two, if you have questions about them. So in addition to dealing with all the new claims, we also dealt with a significant number of new programs. Congress decided to create an unemployment program for self-employed workers and 1099 and gig workers, which is the pandemic unemployment program. This is brand new program that had never been implemented before. In previous years, these folks would not have been eligible for unemployment benefits. And now they were. Because this happened at the same time as the federal pandemic unemployment compensation, which was the additional $600 a week. We couldn't do both of those things in our existing system. And so we created a separate system for the gig workers unemployment. So that necessitated bringing an entirely new program online, computer program online, which we did with a partnership with a vendor. But a lot of folks don't realize there were these other programs that you can see listed, each one of them either adding additional weeks of benefits or additional amounts to the benefits, and all of them required additional computer programming, regulations, policies, and procedures. So going into a huge emergency with an unprecedented amount of claims was hard enough, but then adding on all of these programs to deal with and get benefits out to folks was incredibly challenging. What's not even on here is the Continued Assistance Act, which has added 11 weeks to several of the programs and is currently providing a $300 a week bump in benefits. So that also required new programming. And we're still working to implement all of the provisions of that change. On top of all of that, we were also dealing with unrelenting fraud. And this is probably one of the most frustrating things for us is when we see folks complaining about the performance of our work and saying, we know there's a little bit of fraud, but they should get to processing our claims. In point of fact, there is a tsunami of fraud. So just to kind of give you a high level look at this, Nevada, there are about 3 million people in Nevada. About half of them are in the workforce because they're students or retired or taking care of family. So we have about 1.5 million people in the Nevada workforce. As of December 26th, we had received almost 1.6 million initial applications for unemployment. So we have received more applications for unemployment than there are people in the Nevada workforce. That gives you a sense of the magnitude of the fraud. It is sort of catastrophic. And I mentioned this on a phone call with other state agencies that handle workforce, and no one else had seen this level of fraud where they had received as many applications as they had workers in their state. So I think Nevada is sort of singular in the level of fraud that we have seen. We have been implementing programs, technology, adding staff throughout the year to address fraud. So we have a unit that deals with this specifically. They're working with the national and local law enforcement agencies to address these issues. We have been able to recover over $1 million in fraudulent payments. So we are making some progress in that front. And we are also working with the National Association of State Workforce Agencies to continue to work with their integrity center to identify fraudulent cases where people are applying in more than one state, and using technology to improve our ability to prevent fraud and then investigate and prosecute fraud after it occurs. As you all know, we also redeployed hundreds of staff from inside of DETR to help address the pandemic at the beginning. We created a call center to answer PUA-specific questions. We just want to take a little pause to sing the praises of our IT department. Many states, their IT systems went offline for days and days. Ours never went offline for more than regularly scheduled maintenance, and I was able to stay online, albeit a little bit slowed down at times, but it did keep sort of chugging away. So that is a real credit to our small but dedicated IT team. But like every state, our system was overwhelmed and backlog certainly developed. The governor created the strike force in August of 2020. And with the help of the strike force, we brought on 200 workers from welfare who in overtime have helped us process cases. They just passed processing over 100,000 cases for us. So that was a great addition. We got a contract for contract staffing with Maximus. That's 200 staff who are helping us answer the phones and process claims. We brought the call center back under DETR management to address sort of customer service issues. We've implemented ID.me and other fraud measures. We rebuilt the employment security leadership team, and with the help of the task force, cleared out about 95% of the backlog from August. We are almost there, and we continue to work on the backlog. So sort of the big picture. If you remember nothing else from today's presentation about 2020, here's what I want you to know about what went right for DETR. The first one is that we have been helping an average of 300,000 Nevadans week in, week out receive their weekly unemployment benefit payments. And we've paid out over, at the time we first put this together, it was over $8 billion in benefits. I believe we've passed $9 billion in benefits that have gone out to these 300,000 Nevada families and helped keep them in their homes, able to provide food and address the health of their families. Certainly there's still folks in the backlog that we need to get to, but by and large, we have been able to help Nevadans to the tune of $9 billion. And to put that number in perspective, over the last 12 years, we've only paid out, the last 12 years combined, we had only paid out $6.4 billion in benefits. So it was an amazing year, and really amazing that we could keep it all moving, not as fast as we'd like. But I just want to say the team here did an amazing job, and deserves the thanks of a lot of Nevada families that they were able to help. I know you're not a budget committee. The only thing I want you to get from this budget overview slide is that the vast majority of our money comes from federal programs, direct federal administrative dollars to run our programs, or grants and special funding streams. Only 3% of our funds are from the general fund, and those are specifically for voc rehab programs and the Nevada Equal Rights Commission. So as we're going through belt tightening with the rest of the state, those are the programs that are hit most directly, and it creates challenges for us to bring down federal matching grants. But that's all I'm going to say about the budget, unless you have specific questions for us, but those probably in the money committees. So that's the overview we've been providing to folks. There were some specific questions from the committee that I'm just going to go over at a high level, and then we'll stop for your questions. So one of them was sort of, how does this pandemic compare to the Great Recession of 2009? And just coming back to those slides, we showed you a little bit more detail. One is, these are the initial claims for unemployment, and you could see the huge spike that we had in 2020 for initial claims, which happened right after the shutdown order. So not surprising, although the magnitude certainly was. The next slide shows you the continued claims. And again, once we sort of run out the continued claims for this pandemic, I think you'll see very high levels over a long period of time. You can also see that we had several different programs which provide sort of extended benefits, which sort of complicates administration of unemployment, because we have to sequence these benefits in the right way to ensure that folks get the maximum weeks they're entitled to. We did have a question about demographics. This is the chart from January of 2021. This is available on our website, and we could share the link with you. This shows you sort of the levels of unemployment between men and women. And of course, this is just 1 month, so it's a snapshot in time. If we get more information from you all on what you'd like to see, we can put that together. You can see also by ages. On the next slide, you can see by race and ethnicity. And I think many of you are aware that this recession has hit specific industries especially hard, which then I think translated to what we've seen in terms of the different groups that have been hit especially hard. And we do have Dave, our chief economist, to answer questions for you about that, should you have them. I think the next question had to do with what are we doing to pivot back to providing workforce services? So most of our workforce employees are sort of reassigned right now to the unemployment backlog, but we have a small task force that is doing sort of direct matching work, and we have been allowing some folks go back to the workforce programs. Those services are all available a lot of those services are all available online, virtually. You can find training opportunities, you can find job opportunities on the Employ NV worksite. We are working with the local partners to continue to provide services where possible, and we continue to sort of review when will it be safe to reopen our Job Connect sites and start offering those services in person again, but that partly has to do with the governor's directives on COVID safety. But it is certainly top of mind that we need to pivot in 2021 to focus on workforce. The next slide is in response to the question was, what are we doing to focus support, on diverse communities? So again, our Job Connect offices were closed and we reassigned those folks to help with unemployment claims. We are working to bring them back, but they have been able to still do certain outreach efforts to Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. The Fallon office has several monthly outreach events with Indigenous job seekers. You can see the list here. Southern Nevada has been working with Nevada Hope that's targeting these communities as well as low-income populations. AB 465 is being fine-tuned and rolled out in disadvantaged zones. And they're partnering with Nevada Partners and Hope for Prisoners. And we're also partnering with Owen on supporting and advancing the grant that is the Sandy grant, supporting and advancing Nevada's dislocated individuals, and HB1 healthcare grants to target these populations. So those are just some of the initiatives. As you know, the work that we're doing sort of continues to change in response to the conditions. We're doing everything we can to really, like I said, focus on pivoting in 2021 to workforce. We did give you some general contact emails here that you can use to connect with us. And of course, your staff can connect with our staff at any time. So that we really appreciate the opportunity to give you an overview of the last year for us, because we know you've heard some of it in the news, but we wanted the chance to kind of give you the big picture look at our agency. And with that, we are happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Cafferetta. I think I see a couple of hands from the committee members. Vice Chair Neal.
Thank you, Senator Spearman. So I have a couple of comments and then I have one question. Number one, thank you for the presentation and the slide that showed the disparity between the 2011 recession and what happened in 2020. Because I know, although you were not director, Dr. Tiffany Tyler was, there was heavy criticism on her that she was not able to manage that $369,000 a week, but actually she had done an excellent job because no one else had ever been placed in that position to have to manage that. So great, thank you for that. Second comment on the slide, the demographics. I want to thank my colleagues because that was AB 354 that my colleagues who are currently, some of them serving now, voted out of the legislature to then make sure that we were going to get demographics and break it down by subgroup so we could understand how each group in Nevada was being affected by unemployment. So thank you for that slide. And then to my question. So on the slide where you listed the PUEC, P-U-E-C, I had a question around, are we gonna have like wage inflation when we start to calculate the total taxable wages? I remember the discussion that was going on was that when folks were getting the 600 weekly, that this was more than what they were making in their normal job. Now we're at the 300 for the continued assistance, but I wanted to, maybe David can speak to this about what can we see in terms of wage inflation regarding how we now calculate the total taxable wages?
Thank you, David Schmidt, Chief Economist for Dieter, for the record. As far as how we calculate the taxable wage base and benefits in the future, I don't think that this would have any impact because those are all calculated based on the wages in covered employment. And so that specifically relates to what people are earning. There could potentially be, and we don't yet have the data to look at this, if lower wage workers were disproportionately displaced, then there could be some impact to average wages in the state. However, I don't think that would be a very large impact, mostly because even at the worst point of the recession, while we had 30% unemployment, we still did have 70% employment. And so it was really in the accommodation and food service industry in particular that we saw by far the most disproportionate impact. Every industry saw increases in unemployment. That industry rose from about, these are rough numbers, but I want to say about 30% of our total claims to about 50% of our total claims on a weekly basis. And so it was very focused in that industry. That is a somewhat lower paid industry on average. The average wage in that industry is a little over $600 compared to about $950 in the economy more broadly. But that means that there could be some impact, but I don't think it would be a large impact in as much as we're looking at how will benefits and taxes on employers be calculated in the future. As far as the replacement rate, at $300 or $400, I don't think you're going to see any broad groups where there's sort of a categorical earning more on unemployment than you are earning in benefits, like we saw with the $600 amount. That did push some people up to 105, 110% industry average wage replacement. But with the significantly lower FPUC amounts under current and proposed law nationally, there would still be fairly large wage replacement, but I don't think it would get up to that 100% level.
So just quick follow-up. So you don't think that 100% or 105% replacement rate, that you need to do any additional math to either offset that for a new calculation for, if we go into the next quarter, because it seems like although it may be a small subset, that it may play a role in contribution rate, I guess, if a person is attached to a certain employer. Does that make sense?
David Schmidt again, for the record. I hear what you're saying, but I don't think that the impact would be large enough because of the total covered wages for the state. Even with so much impact in the accommodation and food service industry, that 30% unemployment lasted a very short time. We are looking at total wages over the course of the year. And by December, our statewide unemployment rate has fallen down to about 9.2%. For Las Vegas, it's 10.4%, so it's definitely higher in that area. But over the state where that calculation is done, I think the impact is small enough that while there might be something happening, it would be on the order of maybe a few percentage points, which is not unlike things that we've seen when the economy is booming and wages are rising rapidly. It's not out of the bounds of what might normally be expected in a given year as far as the wage base for either taxes or future benefit determinations.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I just want to take a point of privilege. I want to follow up on what Vice Chair Neal was asking. So these are numbers that you may or may not be able to figure out. But during this pandemic, there have been some people who moved, and so they're no longer applying for unemployment. And the tragic fact is that we've also had some people who were probably unemployed who have died from complications of COVID. And so has there been any effort to maybe figure out how we might look at that, and how does that play a role in projecting future trends like that, like happened during this pandemic. I mean, if it were to happen 6 years from now, have we learned any lessons based upon those two criterion that says we should be prepared for this?
Thank you, Madam Chair. David Schmidt again for the record. As far as projecting, using our current experience to project our future potential needs, in the ways that we consider the solvency of the trust fund, there's a number of different methods that we use. Over the last 15 years, we've referred to the federal average high cost multiple, which is if you had the rate of benefit payouts, that you had in a particular bad period, adjusted for your current employment and wage levels, how much would you need to be prepared? And so all of the methods that we would use to look at that do take into account the experiences that we've had in the past, looking at specific factors like have people moved out of state or people that have passed away. Those would be reflected in those current employment and wage levels that we use to adjust those solvency calculations. But I think by far the largest impact that we'll see is that now when we look at either the worst year or the worst 3 years in the state's history for decades to come, 2020 will stand out and say, here's what you might face as a potential solvency calculation. And so that definitely will come into play. One of the benefits of the average high cost multiple is it doesn't just use your worst experience ever in the last 10 years, it averages the 3 worst years. And so instead of just 2020, you would look at the average of 2020, 2009, and 2010, which are certainly all bad years, but you're not trying to build up reserves to say we need to prepare for another 2020 to happen in the future. Instead, it's taken into account as one of the factors. But I think that will be the largest thing going forward is how much money might we need? Now we've seen something unlike we'd ever seen before. And I think that'll certainly play a role in thinking about the future moving forward.
Okay, thank you, sir. Senator Pickard, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Director Cafaretta, I appreciate the fact you've only been on the job for a few months and you inherited a Herculean task. I appreciate the fact that you came into this with a different kind of administrative experience, and I think the fact that you're still standing speaks well. The thing, though, and so I don't want my remarks to be taken as negative or personal, but the presentation you just gave, which is really quite rosy and complimentary, has created an enormous amount of dissonance in my mind because it's probably a perfect opposite of what I hear on a daily basis from my constituents. I'm told that there were more than 800,000 additional applications over and above normal for welfare assistance from people that couldn't get through to DETR and get the benefits that they paid for. I mean, they paid a premium for this insurance. There were times when I had people calling my office, which frankly wasn't terribly common, but they were frustrated because they had tried for months to get through, couldn't get through, whether online or on the phone. And so the presentation you just gave is exactly the opposite of my indirect experience through my constituents. And Mr. Sewell, thank you for your patience. I know I directed a lot of people to you and you were able to do all of them, and I appreciate that. And Mr. Schmidt, I'm always impressed with your command of the facts. Let me get to just a couple of things since we're not yet talking about the bill, but I'm wondering, there are some structural things that I've learned over the past few months, things like we're getting payment from the feds in arrears rather than in advance, which we're allowed to do. And we're not taking steps to make sure that we're putting money in the hands of people in ways that we could also identify their identity and so deal with some of the fraud issues. And we're sending letters to claimants demanding that they reimburse the state, and yet there's never been a formal hearing. I mean, due process has not been granted to them, that they haven't been given an opportunity to be heard, let alone make findings that they were improperly paid. And yet they're scrambling to repay these things under the impression that they've been improperly paid. And at the end of the day, I understand that the Special Master's report, which had 140 some pages of recommendations, findings and recommendations, which have yet to be incorporated, and this was from August. What are we doing structurally to actually address the issues that have failed so many Nevadans?
Elisa Caffaretta, Director of DETR. Thank you for the question and the kind words. And the reason we wanted to give you the overview was not to create a rosy picture, but to sort of give you an overview of the magnitude of the task and so really the impossibility of the task of having unemployment operate in the way it had operated in any previous recession, just because of the sheer magnitude of the issues. For those who were here the whole year that lived through it, I think they can certainly relate to your experience and the frustration. This was certainly agonizing for everyone involved. Our staff here has put in an incredible amount of overtime and given up most of their weekends to try and address these issues that you've identified. And the intention of the presentation was not to say there were no problems. The intention was to say this was a Herculean task. We put in many solutions as the year went on. We did do a lot of things right, which those folks probably weren't calling you saying, hey, I got my benefits this week again. But you did hear from the folks that we couldn't get to. So we are as aware of the frustration as you are, for sure. So just to answer some of your specific questions, I did read the Special Master's report right before I started. I would not characterize it as having 140 pages of solutions. I know we have implemented many improvements to the system over the 6 months I've been here. I don't think we have anybody tracking which recommendations from the Special Master's report we've implemented, because we've really been focused on sort of the first 6 months I was here, we were focused on how do we get through the backlog and what solutions can we put in place for that. And this year we're sort of taking a step back and focusing on long-term solutions. But we could probably sort of go through that report and look for the highlights and see which of them we've implemented and which we have not. I would say, having been here for 6 months, it takes quite a while to really get up to speed on what you can and cannot do under the Department of Labor guidelines. So all of those suggestions might not have been feasible legally or technically. And so that's what I would say about the Special Master's report. In terms of getting money to people without identifying them and fraudulent payments going out, the other thing we want you to understand about the magnitude of the problem was when the pandemic first hit, there was incredible pressure from all quarters to get payments out, and particularly from the federal government. They were implementing new programs. They asked us to waive the waiting week, which was sort of a normal fraud protection measure. because people really needed their benefits. So we probably went a little bit on the side of providing benefits, and then expecting the fraud levels to be similar to what we've seen in previous years. That turned out not to be the case. So then we have been sort of pulling back and putting fraud measures in place. Like I said, we have recovered over $100 million of fraudulent payments, and this is where every choice we make is a impossible choice. So for those hundreds of thousands of people that didn't get benefits, we believe we've prevented over $2 billion in fraudulent payments going out to hundreds of thousands of applicants who are not, in fact, legitimate applicants. So could you come back in and say you could have done this a different way? You could have picked a different calculus and come up with a different result? Of course, but we were doing, this team was doing the best they could, and we continue to sort of re-examine those choices and that balance as we go along. In terms of the overpayments, I will say, yes, at the beginning, we had sometimes we have challenges with our vendors in saying, you know, we need to add this module to be able to do overpayments, and it was a little ambitious in the way it got executed. So we were offsetting benefits to pay back overpayments before giving people the chance to appeal and then get a decision. That I think went on for a couple of weeks when we realized that it was happening, and we stopped collecting those overpayments. And we sent the notices out, but gave people the chance to appeal and are not collecting that money until they do get a due process hearing. So that was a temporary problem, which you probably heard about a lot during those weeks, but we aren't doing that anymore. And there's a lot of situations like that as we have gone through and implemented different parts of the program. I'm gonna turn to Jeff Frischman. I don't know if I entirely understood your question about getting payments from the feds in arrears versus in advance. Did you understand that?
Jeff Frischman, for the record, if I understood your question correctly, you said that you learned about getting payments in arrears. I'm not sure if you meant payments to claimants in arrears, or you were suggesting that we're getting our funding in arrears. Could you please clarify?
Yes, I was talking about the funding. A decision, I guess, was made many years ago to obtain that in arrears, as you know, in response to what's paid out. And yet they could, because I know there have been some questions along the way. I know during the special session we were talking about, you know, the fund was going to run out of money, and it was at that point I learned that we could actually get some of this stuff still in advance. So we were working off a pool of money instead of waiting for it to be replenished. But that's actually a minor thing. I guess the thing that I'm most alarmed by is the thought that you know, we're going to pat ourselves on the back for saving a bunch of money. In the process, we've denied the innocent victims their due process rights. I mean, it's a right. It's due process is not an impossible choice, and yet we're denying benefits to people that have paid their premiums because we think there might be fraud. There's been no findings. There's been no hearing. You know, it makes the you know, I think in terms of insurance and bad faith, it makes the State Farm v. Campbell case look like chump change compared to what hasn't been paid out that these people are entitled to. I mean, and with respect to the Special Master's report, I would note that the strike force, Speaker Buckley's report came out 5 months later, just recently, and pointed it to many, if not all of the same recommendations that the Special Master report had. So I mean, I'm alarmed at this point at how far we have to go knowing what these options have been for such a long time. What are we doing to, I mean, I'm alarmed that we're not looking at this as a pathway out. Why aren't we shifting our attention to the recommendations and making that our focus so that we can fix the problem as we go, rather than wait until we get through the backlog and then figure out what we did wrong? Don't we have that backwards?
Elisa Caffaretta, for the record. So I would say it's not accurate to say that we have not been addressing all of these issues as we have gone along. We have been implementing these recommendations. If you read the Strike Force report, it's a combination of the solutions that we have implemented and the ones that we still have to go. So there's a couple of things that I would say about your question. In terms of denying innocent people, as you know, unemployment insurance is governed by federal law. And so for people to get benefits, they must meet the narrow criteria that are established around these individual benefit laws. And the rules for regular unemployment are different than the rules for the pandemic unemployment assistance, are different than the rules for the lost wages assistance. And so while a lot of people self-report that they are qualified for these benefits, in fact, that is not always the case. And so I know I get a lot of constituent calls, people find me, and I would say that a majority of folks who report that they are owed benefits really are not understanding the criteria, and they don't necessarily meet all of the criteria. So I do believe there are still in the tens of thousands of people who we need to look at their cases and adjudicate them, which, as you know, in regular employment, there's a due process requirement. So we have to talk not only to the person who has applied for the benefits, but also to the employer who has reported either they, were fired for cause, or they quit without good cause. We have to hear from both sides. That is a fairly time-consuming process. So I would say that there are hundreds of thousands of people who have been denied without any good reason is not an accurate characterization of where we are or where we have ever been. The hundreds of thousands of people that have been disqualified in the PUA program, the court specifically found that when we had clear and convincing evidence of fraud, it was legitimate for us to deny them without due hearing, to find them ineligible without a hearing. And what we've seen and what we've seen in other states is if people apply and they possibly have name, address, social security number, most likely because of a data breach, but they do not upload documents to prove their identity or their income or earnings, those are likely fraudulent cases. And so, yes, we have found hundreds of thousands of people to be ineligible because they haven't supplied documentation of any kind. And I do think that is to be celebrated, that those represent hundreds of thousands of fraudulent claims that we did not pay out. And if we did pay out, you'd probably be at the front of the list saying, why'd you pay all these frauds? Right? So,
No,
and honestly, due process is an impossible choice, but there are certainly a lot of very challenging choices that have been presented to us.
Thank you, Director Caffaretta. I need to jump in right now because we need to get started on the bill. Hearing the bill, actually, we only have about another 12 minutes or so. I'd like to start at about 9:30. So, Senator Pickard, if you can take a lot of your questions offline and then feel free to bring it back whenever we do a work session. I just got a couple of questions. I saw that on the budget, only 3% comes from the state general fund. Is that right?
Yes. Cafaretta for the record. Yes, that is correct.
And the rest of it comes from federal government?
Yes.
So by inference, would it be fair to say that if federal monies were flowing, especially from May through December, that some of this might have been avoided?
Lisa Cafaretta for the record. Yes, I mean, to Senator Pickard's point about implementing solutions, there is no minimum amount of money that we get every year from the Department of Labor to administer unemployment programs. It's based on the number of claims that we get. We get a base budget amount, and then at the end of every quarter, we true up with the Department of Labor, and they give us above base funding to administer the sort of spike in the program. Clearly, if you're waiting until a quarter later before you get sort of the funding to address the 30% unemployment that you've seen, it makes it very difficult to implement programs. And that most of that money has gone directly to staffing. It's not sort of the magnitude of funding to put in extensive sort of technology improvements, stabilization, or modernization efforts. So we could staff up, but unemployment is an extremely complicated set of laws. So it takes almost a month to get someone trained to be able to answer the phone. To provide information to folks. So there really was a lag because of the way the funding comes down.
Well, and I guess that was really my point. I think it's important to keep all of this in context, that there's only so much that the state can do. And then the rest of it is really dependent upon people at the federal level to act expeditiously with empathy so that many of these things don't happen. I want to just ask a little bit, you don't have to answer right now, you can provide the information later, but you talked about the discrimination point. We had SB 166 was the equal pay bill from last time. Are you all able to use any of the data that you collected to see if there are any trends with respect to improprieties for payment based upon gender? Are you able to use that to look at improprieties based upon perhaps gender identity? And maybe that one might be a little bit harder because we don't have SOGI, we don't have sexual orientation, gender identity right now on any forms. But I'm looking for ways that we might be able to use the data that's already collected to make sure that there's not just equality, but equity for the people of Nevada. Because BIPOC and other marginalized communities so often are overlooked and lumped together, aggregated. And if we disaggregate, I think that we can find some trends and we can do a better job. This is not on you all, but we collectively can do a better job helping out with equity. Everybody's talking about equality, but I want to talk about equity now.
Lisa Cafaretta for the record. Yes, we did get a brief report from NERC on the number of cases that we've seen, and I think we probably need to work together to do more to publicize the SB 166, because I think we have had very few cases that deal specifically with pay. We do get discrimination on all of the categories that you listed, but we haven't seen a lot of pay cases, so we don't have a lot of information about that. But we'll provide that report to you and talk about ways we could get that information and disaggregate those statistics.
I appreciate that. Any other committee members have questions? Okay, well, I guess we will get ready to open the hearing. I just have one last comment, point of privilege. We're waiting now to make sure that money comes down from the federal government. And for me, it's a little bit obnoxious to hear people who are making an average salary of $177,000 a year, $14,000 a month, $3,625 a week, complaining that $2,000 a week or a month is too much for for citizens who are hurting. So my opinion, we're obnoxious. It's obnoxious. So can we move now, if we have no further questions, let's move now into the hearing on Senate Bill 75, please.
This is Elisa Capretta with Dieter. Did you want me to start?
Yes, ma'am, please.
The bill. All right, thank you very much. Switching gears. SB 75 is a bill that's designed to address the issues that have risen due to COVID-19. It's intended to solve problems that we dealt with during the pandemic, including the lawsuit and updated federal guidance and laws that we have received. Overall, the goal is to make sure we are in a position to handle future economic disruptions more effectively, although I don't think anyone could have ever predicted what we saw. So there will be limits on that. I just want to pause. We have had several conversations with different organizations that had questions and concerns about the bill. I did want to say this is not a bill that's designed to raise rates, although because of the experience, they'll ultimately have to go up. But it's really designed, at least those sections of the bill are designed to stabilize the rates and the trust fund and make it more sustainable. As we go through the bill, want to make sure you are aware there are two kinds of employers: contributory employers who pay into the unemployment system that the benefits come out of. That money goes into the trust fund. And then there's also a category called reimbursable employers. These folks reimburse the trust fund for the actual unemployment benefits that are paid out to their employees. Most governments, school districts, nonprofits, and religious organizations fall into this category. And employment benefits are based on a person's previous wages. So section 1, and I'm going to give you a very high level overview of the bill, not super detailed, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Section 1 of the bill, basically, to take a step back, deals with setting the rates for unemployment benefits. And section 1 and section 14 go together. Section 14 is currently where this calculation is done. And basically, under current law, what we do is we sort of look at the highest benefit payout rates in the last 10 years. And that gives us an estimate of the potential benefits that we might need in a downturn. Obviously, not so great for 2020. It isn't a required calculation for setting the rates right now. And it certainly doesn't, when you have the months and months and years of sort of economic growth that we've had, aside from the pandemic, it really isn't sort of a very reflective of the experience that we might expect. So section 1 of the bill basically addresses these challenges. It puts into place a prescriptive unemployment tax rate process using the federal average high cost multiple, which is really what we have been using to set the rates since 2005, but it actually puts it into statute. And it really provides a more stable and predictive tax rate setting process. So instead of sort of an open-ended calculation, it calculates an average contribution rate for employers based on the current adequacy of the trust fund. And this is probably the most important point for employers, is it limits the magnitude of change in the tax rates from years to year, and it provides a more stable tax rate for employers. So when I was preparing for presenting this bill to you, I probably spent 4 hours on this section alone trying to figure out what the economist was doing. But here's the bottom line for those of us who are not so into the math. Basically, we kind of take a look at what's needed to stabilize the trust fund, and then we We will not raise the rate more than 10% in any given year, and we will not lower the rate 10% in any given year, but we'll continue to invest in the trust fund to make sure that it is sustainable and stable. That's the non-math version of what's happening in Section 1. And Dave isn't scowling at me, so I must have done that okay. Section 2, this would basically remove the alternative base period calculation option from state law. Right now, under unemployment benefits, your benefit is based on the wages from the first 4 quarters of the last 5 quarters. That's because it takes us a little while to get wages from employers. So those are the ones we can actually see. But there's an option under current law. If you don't have enough wages there, you can use the most current quarter. That actually creates quite a bit of administrative work for us because we have to contact the employer and try and get your actual wages. And some employers are very cooperative and some are not. So one of the things, the reason that we suggested taking this out is that it has not historically benefited a lot of folks, but it creates additional work. We believe that needing to do this calculation contributed significantly to the backlog. And so when we asked for the bill, we said, if you want to solve this problem in the future, you might consider taking it out. I will note that we have been contacted by the Nevada Coalition of Legal Service Providers. They would like the alternative base period to remain in state law. So we're in conversations with them. We can provide information to you about the costs and the number of folks who used that if you are interested. But that's why it's in the bill. And you are the policymakers. You will decide who we cover and provide unemployment benefits for, and we will administer it whichever way you go forward. Section 3 of the bill basically brings confidentiality of beneficiaries and employers and the public records sections of NRS 612 into compliance with federal law, which is 20 CFR 603. We think some specific agencies that we share data with might have concerns, but and especially the ones that had a specific call out in the statute, we think this is a better approach by conforming with the federal law because it doesn't distinguish at the federal level between state, local, federal, or county governments. Our state law, there is some sort of discrepancy between those different agencies, and it's been challenging to implement. So we think this cleans it up and makes it easier to implement and is consistent with federal law. Section 4 corrects a math issue in terms of allowing people to work and earn in the old statute, you could earn up to your weekly benefit amount. In the special session, we passed a law allowing folks to earn up to 1.5 times their benefit amount, and then created a math problem for ourselves. So this keeps the special session flexibility and corrects the math error. And if you want to know how, I'll have to defer to Dave on that. So going pretty quickly now, the changes in sections 5, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 17, 18, and I think there's one more further down, all make it so we have permission to provide notice through electronic transmission as well as mail or other formats. We tried to get this done in the special session. We didn't quite get there. So this would allow us to provide email or electronic notices to folks who opt in or request that. It doesn't prevent us from mailing, but it gives us the option. Employers specifically would really like to not have to wait to get mail to get a notice. They would like to get it in their portal more quickly so they can respond more easily. And if you have questions about any of these specific sections, we'd be happy to discuss them. In section 15 specifically, in addition to the electronic mail, we are proposing, and I believe you have our conceptual amendment, we are proposing to codify the relief that we provided by regulation for charging relief for contributory employers in the second and third quarters of 2020. So that those charges that we relieved last year will not be applied to employers in subsequent years, as well as the 50% charging relief that we offered to reimbursable employers for the same quarters for the same reasons. Jumping down to section 6, we were looking to clarify unemployment insurance. Federal law doesn't allow teachers to get unemployment insurance if they are not working during the summer, if they've got a job to go back to in the fall. And in Nevada, that law also applies to the support services, not just teachers, but bus drivers, food service folks. And this sort of clarifies who is disqualified from applying for unemployment benefits and who is not disqualified. It includes an error. So in our conceptual amendment, you'll see in section 6 and section 7 that we need to require contributory and reimbursable employers to pay for these benefits. We can't take them off the hook. That is in violation of federal law. So we do have that correction for you. And we also would let you know here that we've been contacted by the Nevada State Education Association. They would like to amend this section to allow unemployment eligibility for 9, 10, and 11-month educational support professionals. We're in conversation with them about that. And again, this is a policy question for you. Who gets unemployment benefits and who does not within the flexibility of state law. This is allowable under federal guidance. And the one thing I would note here for you is, as far as we know, all of the school districts are reimbursable employers. So if you allow these folks to be covered by unemployment insurance, the school districts would have to reimburse the trust fund directly for all of those benefits paid out. I know you're not a budget committee, but it would, you would probably see fiscal notes from the school districts on that. As noted, section 7 has the same error as section 6. This covers educational folks in university and community college settings. Section 14 is the next change. This is the companion piece about dealing with the rates. So we would be taking out the old calculation that we were required to do, but it wasn't binding on what the rate is. So that's why you see it taken out here. Section 16 allows or clarifies that Indian tribes, nonprofits, political subdivisions have the option of either contributing as contributory employers or opting in to be reimbursable employers. Section 19 is also something that conforms with federal legal requirements. It prohibits the jury commissioner from using our information for purposes of creating a list of qualified electors to be trial jurors. And then a couple of new sections that we're proposing to add, again, to conform to what we did in response to COVID-19. The charging relief, sort of codifying that. We are looking to add a section, and I don't have on my notes which section this goes to, but we want to make sure that anyone who is serving, wants to serve a petition for judicial review, serves us at our Carson City location so that we are, it's clear to us when we've been served, and it's clear to claimants how to serve us so that all the legal paperwork gets to the right place and can be responded to on time. Section 21 clarifies that the state and the agency cannot be charged fees for any kind of proceeding by the Board of Review or the administrator. Section 22 takes advantage of a change that specifically was implemented under the Continued Assistance Act, which allows us to provide extended benefits during periods of high unemployment rates without turning that option off for 13 weeks. And finally, we then want to change the effective dates to incorporate all the added sections. There it is, high-level overview. Happy to answer specific questions.
Thank you, Ms. Cafferetta. I'm sorry, Director Cafferetta. So I have questions from Senator Settlemyre, and then Vice Chair Neal and Senator Pickard.
Thank you, Chair Spearman. I appreciate the time. Let me start out with this. I had actually tried to talk earlier, but unfortunately, my digital hand wasn't recognized. So that being said, what we did in the previous regular session when we cut Dieter's budget was very problematic, and it unfortunately set Dieter into the situation they were at. I mean, they told us back then, if we cut the budget to Dieter back then, they indicated if we had any hiccup at all, that this train would be completely off its track and we would be in trouble. Well, we had more than a hiccup. So in that respect, I do not in any way, shape, or form blame Dieter for what has occurred. We just need to fix the issue that is now before us. And the bill that is now before us, I'm worried that I don't see anything in here from the Special Master's Report, 144 pages, the 38 pages from former Speaker Buckley. Is there anything in here about, a claimant advocate, any of that stuff? I don't see that. And that's where I'm very perplexed. But within the actual bill that's before us, I'm worried because what's the problem that's been identified? Why are we tampering with the rates when in the past the system has worked? I mean, businesses need to be able to hire employees and they need to survive and expand. And by changing these rates, this will affect their ability to do so in an overly cumbersome, overly complex system that I'm talking to experts that are out there online that are in the industries, and they're not able to figure out how this is going to work. I mean, why are we going to a concept of peaks over a 20-year period that's just way too long? What's wrong with the system we've had in the past where we do a special assessment and we try to get ourselves out? It's always worked in the past. I mean, in the last recession, which we thought was catastrophic, but by comparison was nothing but a baby bump. We've done this and been able to do it. And this concept of 11 days to respond, and also by shifting this to electronic, I'm concerned. I don't know if you know this, but sometimes when people lose money, they quit their electronic devices. They quit their ability to have Wi-Fi. How are they going to be able to respond in 11 days versus an old system that worked, which was both electronic and certification by mail to make sure that people were taken care of? I'm worried at shifting this to the concept of NRS and just referring to the federal law, because then it seems like we're taking away options, taking away ability for constituents to get the information that only Dieter has that they need in order to file their claim. And I know that's a lot, but that's where I'm at this point in time. I'm very concerned with this legislation.
Elisa Cafferetta, for the record, I will respond to a couple of things. So several of the recommendations from the strike force you will see them in another place. This bill doesn't address all of the issues. So there certainly are budget bills. There's stabilization money in the governor's budget. There may be a standalone bill to address technology issues. That's a funding issue, not a policy issue. The same with the claimant advocate. We are implementing that with existing staff and then looking at the staff additions that we have to identify that position. So you will see that in a budget bill, not in a policy bill. To the specific issue of electronic records, we, again, just to be clear, we're asking for the ability to do electronic and mail records and allowing folks to opt in. So if you don't have an email, you're obviously not going to get email notifications. You will continue to get mail notifications. It was specifically employers that we have traditionally mailed a notice, hey, so-and-so at your business has applied for unemployment. Is it true that they were laid off through no fault of their own? If you are waiting for that to arrive in the mail and then are responding that way, it's not instantaneous, and employers specifically have asked for that notification by email. So, but there's nothing in this bill that prevents us from mailing people who want the information by mail. It just would allow us to offer email communications to people who want that. Overall, again, I would say about the rates, this is designed to stabilize the rates, and it does set limits on how much we can increase or decrease the rate. So it will provide much more stability and predictability for the business community. And I'll let Dave talk about sort of conceptually why we think this is much better than what we've always done. So I'll just turn over to Dave.
David Schmidt for the record, and to try to sum it up for the senator in sort of high level. Why 20 years? Because that's the federally recommended standard in part to make it a little bit consistent with other states. Also because since 2 of our last 3 economic expansions have lasted 10 years or more, 120 months and about 10 and a half years for the most recent one. Right before COVID, there was an awareness that the formula that's currently in statute would be rapidly dropping and recommending something far lower than what we recognize might be necessary given our prior experience. And so the 20 years is an attempt to update the formula and the process to look at what we've experienced over the last several decades. Historically, expansions were 5.5 years, and 10 years was a pretty reasonable number. But we've hit the 10-year mark of ongoing, uninterrupted growth nationally frequently enough that a broader standard might be necessary. And also the 3-year average, again, to help smooth out the potential highs and lows that exist in the current formula and statute. The existing process does, I think, in my opinion, work fairly well because we have some flexibility, but it also has the risk of large swings in the rate. In the Great Recession, we went from a rate of 1.3% to 2% in 1 year, which was a 50% increase on average for employers. That was a much larger increase than what would be allowable under this current statute, this proposed statute, which would smooth out those increases from year to year. It would delay the payment for what we're about to see with COVID. If we were to try to repay in 1 year the formula that'll be coming up based on our experiences in 2020, the proposed rate that you would have to implement the standard and statute is about 2.5 times the maximum theoretical rate possible if we put every employer at the highest possible rate of 5.4%. It's so far beyond what we can accomplish. Now, the rate in statute is actually not all that far off. It would say about 10.5%. I think it's in the presentation we put together last night. But by capping the increase or decrease from year to year, it smooths that out and makes it a more predictable thing that employers can hopefully plan for over multiple years instead of every single year being a what are they going to do this year question. So I think that's the reason for Section 1.
So in that respect, you indicated that we're going to have to repay it in 1 year. Have we ever tried to repay in 1 year when we've had such a catastrophic event?
We have not. The largest increases that we've
So then
seen,
that's kind of a red herring. That's where I'm a little offended that you said that, because again, saying that we wouldn't have to pay in 1 year, we've never done that. So if we haven't done that, why would you bring it up saying you didn't have to? Because we've never had to. I mean, that'd be ridiculous to try to repay the billions of dollars. And do we also have to repay the fraud, or we just have to pay the legitimate stuff back?
In this case, it would be how many dollars do we need to have in the trust fund? Any recoveries from fraud would also go into the trust fund and would be picked up in that deed. The large tax rate is for what comes out of the formula as it is in statute. And it's the unpredictability of, will it be a 50% increase, 100% increase, a 10% increase? I think that's the goal, to both say, here's what we would need, and here's what next year will actually be. And to not just have the one with a question mark in the rate setting process for the other.
I appreciate that. The other thing you discussed earlier, though, was the concept that nothing prevents you from mailing as well. I would like to make sure within this language that you still have to, you shall mail in addition to the concept of email, so that we're not cutting off opportunities for constituents to be able to get information. I'll let that go. Obviously, there's some serious concerns with me within this piece of legislation, so I'll just let that go for now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Vice Chair Neal?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I kind of have questions that get a little bit into what Senator Settlemyre, except for I'm getting into the weeds a little bit. So in section 1, I heard the overview, the high level, but I want to go a little bit deeper, right? So we're going into a change for the contribution rate that's a certain percentage of. And I think the issue that I was having, or the questions that I need answered, are if you go to section 1, sub 1B, I want to get into the economic cycles, the peaks, the 3 monthly economic cycle peaks. And this is to David, because I want you to break this down for me. The 3 economic cycle peaks is 2 recessions, right? I mean, you mentioned 3, but isn't 3 economic cycles 2 recessions versus 3? That's the first part, and then I have a little bit more to that.
David Schmidt for the record. So I believe it could be 2 if the timing is just right. When you're doing the calculation, if you are at or just beyond an economic cycle peak, it would only look back to 2 recessions. The reason that I went with that particular definition instead of the Fed's more generic 3 recessions is in our experience, we typically see the largest increases in benefits shortly after the economy peaks, when it starts going downhill. And so to look back to the last 3rd peak, there would be sort of 3 of those downslopes from the peak to the trough captured in the 20-year period. And that's why I went with that term.
Okay, and then my second question is, because this is where my mind was going. So since this peak, going forward, if this bill is passed, one of the recessions is going to include the pandemic recession, correct? And so what I was trying to understand is, what then are the indicators in the peak? Like, so the peak is created by which factors? I had wrote down that, it's payroll, employment measures, and then the special circumstances of the pandemic. And so I guess what I was trying to understand is, what's this aggregate economic activity that we're examining by you setting that sentence in this bill, if that makes sense.
Thank you, David Schmidt, again for the record. The key thing that's being measured is the benefit cost rate, or the cost rate, which is the share of benefits being paid out, or the total benefits paid out divided by taxable wages at that point in time. You can think of it as the UI tax rate that would be necessary to pay for those benefits on a cash flow basis. And then how that is updated for the current year is, in the current year, assuming that we've been growing and wages have been rising, the total taxable wages are higher. And therefore, if you take that rate and multiply it by our current taxable wages, you get, if we had to pay out benefits as fast as we did back then, but on the current level of wages and employment in the state, what benefits might be necessary to pay, if that makes sense. And then those three benefit cost rates, the three highest, are then averaged, which would end up being the rates currently for 2020, for 2009 and 2010 is the three highest years.
Okay. Thank you for that. So what I really wish that you would have done before I get into my next two questions, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the indulgence, is to be able to have a chart that would have showed us a comparison, right? Here's the old model, and here is the new model we are proposing. And so we can see that comparison contrast and really get a, for visual learners, to really see the distinguishing patterns of the two and the effects, right? So maybe we can get that later. So I was listening to the conceptual amendments. So my question is on, I'm still in section 1, but I'm on sub J, that will be line 24, where we are changing to the June 30th date on line 25 to March 31st. And so the question that I had in my mind when you guys made the conceptual amendment shift is, what's the effect of the change of that date? I heard something, but it wasn't clear to me, right, on why we went from June 30th to March 31st. Talk to me about the mechanics of that date.
Certainly, David Schmidt again for the record. That comes down to where we get the data from. The data to make all of these calculations we use from the quarterly census of employment wages, which is a Bureau of Labor Statistics program, which uses unemployment insurance data that's been reviewed and cleaned to make sure that the number is coming in as accurately as possible. And because that data is available only on about a 5-month delay basis, June would have been too ambitious. We wouldn't have that quarter's data available as of September 30th when we typically go through the rate setting process. And so the most current data that's available at that time is from March 31st. And you can see this actually if you look at existing statute in I want to say it's in our 612-550 section 7. But in the current calculation, we use the payroll information as of March 31st for that same reason. And so it's to bring it into line with what we have available.
Okay. And then, Madam Chair, my last question, then I'll let other people get into whatever they want to. So staying on that framework of now, thank you for explaining March 31st will help you get the data. And now if you go to line 31, J, or that's sub 3, where it's like by September 30th of each year, the administrator shall determine. So this is the AHCM, right? So it's that average high cost multiple, but what it does is it helps, it's a technical measure of how you weather the economic downturn. So my interpretation was, if you give yourself the March 31st, then by September, you're giving yourself time to do the analysis, number one. Number two, the question that I was trying to figure out is, when you set this measurement out that, okay, I think we're in a good place to weather the economic downturn, how then, I guess I was trying to figure out how we were dealing with this pandemic kind of factors that are tied into this measurement of the economic downturn, right? Because our current economic downturn is not traditional. It is actually abnormal and it is unusual. And so I was trying to understand if the thing that we're setting in statute is the appropriate measurement, because the next downturn will be significantly different. And so does that make your calculation and the data set that you will need different as well? Does that make sense? It was a long way around, but I had to gather my thoughts.
Thank you, Senator David Schmidt, again for the record. Because of how crazy this recession has been, I think any measure that tries to look back to see what you might need in the future would be affected by this. And so is this a tailored COVID response, except for the reduction in effort in what it takes to plan out a number of different rate scenarios? I would say probably not. And we have some slides that were put together, and we'll certainly send them along after if we haven't already, that have some of those visual layouts. But the charts that I did in those slides compare if we had this in place back in 1985, and we had this sort of process for setting rates through the growth that we had in the 80s and the 90s, and even through the early 2000s, through those very small recessions that you saw earlier. It would have clearly had an impact in growing the trust fund more than we did during those times, to the point where the estimates that I did with the parameters that we have in the proposed legislation here would have made it through both the Great Recession and, as of when I did these estimates a couple of months ago, the COVID pandemic without needing to borrow funds from the federal government. Because of the course of continuing to build the trust fund through those times of economic prosperity with a more stable rate. It would have significantly dampened the increase that employers saw in rates during the last recession. It would propose increasing rates for the next several years in response to what we saw with COVID and the drawdowns we've had in the trust fund. But I would think of it as a long-term, what could we change now so that in 10 or 20 or 30 years, if we can hopefully get back to no more great recessions and COVID recessions, but just something as bad as 9/11, how could we prepare the trust fund to weather storms like this in the future? If they keep coming at this pace, that's an impossible thing to prepare for. But if we were to get back to something a little more normal, hopefully this could help to build those reserves over a long period of time so that we're more prepared for something like we've seen in the last 10 years, 15 years.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for my exercise of mental something.
Senator Neal, I wouldn't expect anything less of you. I'd be disappointed. Have Senator Hardy and then Senator Scheibel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to go on the record of thanks, particularly for the PowerPoint that was so transparent to the extent that we look at the fraud and what we took from the federal government and where we were and how we did. I think it was masterfully done, and I appreciate it. I appreciated the talk on the electronic upon request. I think the opt-in obviously is very needed because by the time you get into a problem, you may find that the mail that you said you didn't need, but you needed to opt into it, then you may not have the electronics anymore. So I think the mail is critical. The opt-in is great, especially when we look at all the things that Dieter sends out. But I think the reality is we have to make sure we document it the right way. I'm just really kind of saying, well, let me put it this way. What is the rate now? What is the rate next month? What is the rate next year? What is the rate change from year to year? Going along what Senator Neal was talking about, the graph that we can say, looking backward, looking forward, from right now, where are we now and where are we going to be, so that people who are in business can say, well, this is the worst that it could be, or this is the best that it could be. And then my other question is, when we talked about insurance, what we've done in essence is we've used the federal government as our backstop. They were the Lloyds of London, as it were, for our unemployment insurance. And what is it? Can we do insured the insurance with a certain amount of money, or do we always depend on the federal government? And an interesting phrase was used, the federal government, we borrowed from the federal government. Does that mean I have to pay back $9 billion or $8 billion, depending on how you do the math, to the federal government? And, you know, those are my observations, questions, and wishes that I knew more if somebody could address those. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Hardy. This is Elisa Caffaretta for the record. So we've noted your comments and concerns about electronic and snail mail. Let me add a couple let me add a little bit of information for all of you, which isn't related to the bill, but is what we've done with the rate. And then I'll speak to the trust fund. And if I haven't answered all your questions, we'll give Dave a crack at it. So the rate that employers pay for unemployment benefits is a yearly rate. Traditionally, employers get charged for they get set at a rate, and then based on the experience of the actual number of unemployment claims that are submitted against them, their rate may go up depending on if they're within a range or if we're seeing high level of claims against them. So your experience rating could go up, sort of like car insurance, if you get in a bunch of crashes or you have a bunch of unemployment claims filed against you. That's sort of how it works in a regular time. And then we'll set the rate for the next year. What we have done because of the unusual and dramatic nature of the COVID pandemic is we adopted regulations to say, we are not charging employers for that experience in quarters 2 and 3 of 2020. So the vast majority of claims that came in were in the middle of 2020. And we're sort of saying to employers, no harm, no foul. We know that had nothing to do with sort of the normal course of events. So we are not charging employers. They'll just see their same regular rate for the second and third quarters, which we're codifying in the bill. So, you know, as we're looking at rates over time, those charges won't ever come back into their accounts. The other thing we did by regulation, just so employers know, is we also said, we are setting the rates for 2021 exactly the same as the rates for 2020. So in the very near term, when you ask what were they last year and what are they going to be next year, the same. We are not changing the rates, again, just because it was something no one could predict. And it's not the time to try and sort of get this money because employers are hurting just as well as claimants. So that's sort of the rate setting. And then what we've proposed in the bill is that, you know, we would sort of slowly and gradually make the rate the right thing. When you talk about relying on our friends at the federal government, that actually is a law that has been in place since the 1930s, that we can borrow from the federal government for benefits so that we can continue to provide benefits in an uninterrupted way for claimants, even if we didn't have enough in our trust fund. And understand that before the pandemic, we had over $2 billion in our trust fund. It was very healthy, it was very stable, and it actually held out almost until all the way through December. So we were in a very solid position, just events obviously overwhelmed us. But it's completely standard operating procedure to borrow from the feds. And you probably remember when we did this in the Great Recession, I think we borrowed about 900 million approximately. And yes, we do ultimately have to pay that back. We worked with the employer community, we charged a special assessment, and we just paid that off, I believe, 2 years ago. So it takes a while, and we try not to make the hit to employers too shocking. So we actually borrowed and bonded against it and paid off that bond. It's a very standard thing to do. So I would also say about the trust fund, because we were in such a solid position, we expect that we are looking at about borrowing $250 million, more or less on average. Because the other thing that's happening is employers are still paying in. And as benefits go past the sort of the traditional unemployment weeks, people go on to extended benefits, which are covered 100% by the federal government. So even though there's a lot of money going out in benefits, as you get past sort of the first 6 months, most of those are being paid by the federal government. So we expect we're going to be borrowing about $250 million from the federal government. It is currently, we are borrowing that interest-free right now. We expect that that the interest-free option expires in March, but they may extend it to August. We haven't sort of turned to how are we going to pay this back yet. We're not quite there, but we certainly could discuss sort of our options with you when we get a little bit closer to that. But I think we were in such a solid position that we are borrowing a lot less than we borrowed in the Great Recession. So I think we're in great shape.
Lisa.
And Jeff would like to add just a few thoughts to that.
Jeff Frischman, for the record, just to clarify, so it's not taken out of context, is that the average tax rate will not change. So employers may see some change in their tax rate depending on their experience rating, but the average tax rate will remain the same. So just to clarify that, so you understand that naturally you're going to see some adjustments based on that experience rating.
It's very helpful. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Elisa. Thank you, Jeff.
Senator Scheibel?
Thank you, Chair Spearman. I also have a couple of questions on a couple of different sections, if that's okay. And I'm going to start at the very beginning. In section 1, I've been reading through these definitions, and you've done a great job going over them, summarizing them, talking about some of the different impacts that they have. But I'm concerned about the trust fund adequacy level, because I see this term 3 times in the bill, and it is used to inform the net average, or sorry, the high cost multiple. But what I'm not seeing that I expected to see when I first started reading the bill was some kind of trigger for that trust fund adequacy level that we have to meet, that we have to stay at, that we have to establish. And so I was hoping that you could kind of explain to me how that adequacy level interacts with the high cost multiple to ensure that we have the funds to cover what we need to cover in a given year.
David Schmidt again for the record. In short, the intention that I had, and if it's not clear, can certainly try to address that, is that the adequacy level is essentially the dollar amount of the average high cost multiple. The high cost multiple is a ratio. So 1.50 would mean that you have essentially 1.5 years worth of benefits as measured by the balance in your trust fund or what you might need. Adequacy, I'm trying to get away from the word solvency, which is often used in these contexts because that implies whether you're above or below 0, and we're really talking about, do you have a certain dollar amount or not? And that, for context, an average high cost multiple of 1 prior to COVID was about $1.3 billion. An average high cost multiple of 1 post-COVID is probably going to be closer to $2.5 billion. Or that might be 1.5. I was just looking at this last night, and so the numbers are a little garbled in my head. But there's definitely been a large increase. But the central thought there is how many dollars would represent a year's worth of benefit payments. And if the adequacy level is measured against a multiple of 1.5, then it would be how many dollars do you need in the trust fund to represent 1.5 years worth of benefits at that high cost payout rate.
Okay. And then which part of the bill tells us what we do if that number, the trust fund adequacy level, is higher than what is currently in the trust fund?
So I want to say it's subsections 4 and 5, or maybe 4. We can look it up real quick. But there is a provision that says if the average high cost multiple is above 1.5, then the provisional trust fund, or the provisional rate, would be your average benefit cost over the last 5 years, specifically the median cost over the last 5 years times 1.1. So you say, what's our current cash flow need for benefits? And then 10% above that to ensure some level of default toward a little bit of growth in the long term, subsection 4. And then the other side is if it's below 1.5, then you take what was last year's benefit cost rate, how much would you need to repay any loans that you have, and what would it take to get up to that level of 1.5 over the course of 6 years. And then all of that, in either case, is sort of bracketed by the you can't go up or down more than 10%. So you have your 1.5 and you have either 10% above costs if you're good, or what is our actual need to get to where we want to be. But then both of those are ultimately bracketed at the end of the section by you can't go up or down by more than 10%. So if it's more than 110% of last year's rate, then it's just 110% of last year's rate. If it's below 90% of last year's rate, then it's just 90% of last year's rate.
Okay, so that looks to me like it is related, and correct me if I'm wrong, to the policy proposal to remove the alternative base level, or sorry, I can't remember the exact term, the alternative base period, and also to remove school professionals, because now we're talking about 2 additional ways to reduce the number of claims that we have to pay, or the amount of money that we have to pay out of the fund. And are both of those measures in this bill for the express purpose of getting us to that adequacy level, or are these in there for some other reason? And we can go one by one if that's easier. I'm seeing a parallel.
This is Elisa Cacaretta, for the record. The intention of clarifying the language around around the school professionals and taking out the option for alternative base period has nothing to do with the amount in the trust fund. The trust fund was quite robust, and we had these, so they're unrelated. It's just all in sort of 612. So the reason we put not using alternative base period in our bill was we felt it contributed significantly to the backlog because it requires a manual review. And we can certainly discuss that in more detail. But we felt that it wasn't, very few people were using it. It contributes a lot of work for us. And a lot of the people that use it, at least in the case of COVID, actually ended up, because their UI benefits were lower, they would have made more money in the pandemic unemployment assistance because they were disqualified from UI. That may be so unique to just COVID situation that it shouldn't be considered. But just at the time we proposed the bill, we felt that it really wasn't that helpful to folks. It really added to the backlog, and those folks would have been better off in PUA. As you said, there's a proposal to change that. So that will be a discussion for you on a policy level. And the school professionals, they cannot apply for unemployment, so they're not currently in the trust fund. And if they were applying for unemployment, if you made that policy decision, they're under reimbursable employers generally, and we would have to be reimbursed directly for those benefits. So it wouldn't have an impact to the trust fund at all. So they're more policy questions than trust fund solvency, adequacy.
Okay,
Can I?
And
Okay.
Jeff would like to add one clarification, and this is the difference between 6 months and 60 years of experience. So let Jeff clarify.
Jeff Frischman for the record. To talk about ABP just a little bit so you get a grasp on what we're talking about. And, we're doing a cost benefit analysis on this is essentially what we're doing. Let me give you some numbers so you get a better grasp on this. In 2019, there were 2,318 ABP claims processed, of which 1,302 claimants were paid. The cost of doing that 2,318, the cost in terms of time, it requires 57 extra minutes in order to work or process an ABP claim. That in terms, if we call it an hour, let's just round it off, 2,318 hours was spent on this. That in terms of taking regular claim, it takes 10 times longer to process an ABP claim than it does a regular claim. What that means is we had 23,000 less calls that we could take on the phone, 23,000 less people we could serve in 2019 in order to pay 1,302 people those benefits. Now we fast forward to 2020. We processed 11,604 ABP claims. Obviously, that's going to take 11,604 hours. That is, we ended up paying out of that 8,113 claimants. But what that prevented us from doing and spending that time of answering 116,000 calls. So the cost benefit analysis on it, where would be the wisest time to spend our time working the ABP claims or servicing 10 times more people? And that's really the crux of the question, of the policy question here is the suggestion of where should we be spending our time? What is the most benefit to the most people? And we feel as though by removing the ABP, that would be the why, a suggested method. So I hope those numbers give some context to what we're talking about when we're saying it creates a huge workload and what it's taking away serving so many other Nevadans.
thank you. That does help answer my question. And I also want to ask a follow-up clarifying question. So if we put that time that you're talking about that it takes to evaluate those claims into terms of money, we're talking about overhead, staff salaries, or hourly wages, things like that. That money comes from a completely different pot than the money that would actually be paid to the claimants should they be approved. Am I right?
Jeff Frischman, for the record, you are correct.
Okay. Then I just have one more question, unrelated to the previous 8 or so that I asked. And I am curious why this bill proposes that DETR stop providing information to jury commissioners.
Okay. You don't have to do it.
Okay.
Just talk loud.
For the record, Troy Jordan, Senior Legal Counsel to the Employment Security Division. That is because the Department of Labor has specifically told us to cease the program. And here's the problem. When this was conceptualized, and it was conceptualized by, I believe it was Assemblyman Ozzie Fumo at the time, we agreed with the policy, as I do as a lawyer, that more diverse jury pools are always a good thing. The problem is, and it also relates to our confidentiality statute of NRS 612-265, which is controlled federally by 20 CFR 603. 20 CFR 603 defines a public agency or public official that we can share data with broadly more than the average person would understand. It's not just an elected official, but also state agencies and certain things. What the Department of Labor has ruled is that based on how Nevada jury commissioners are seated, they do not qualify as a public official for data sharing. It has been ruled by the Department of Labor that they are not elected officials and that they are in the judicial branch as employees of the judiciary and not of the judges themselves. So what occurred was we did the bill, Assemblyman Fumo did the bill to expand to add us to the list. When we tried to promulgate regulations to make it work, the Department of Labor jumped in and said, do not pass that regulation. It will be a major conformity issue. The way we see it, you have to send it directly to the judges. Well, Senator Scheibel, I happen to know you're also an attorney. You know that that's not how we do that in Nevada. It goes to the jury commissioner who then puts it out to the JEA or representative of the court, and then the jury's polled. It turned out that we just can't get there in Nevada under our current system. And what made it even more complex was I found out doing my research, and I vetted this for months trying to make this work just to let the committee know. We have several counties that have actually made their court clerk separate from their county clerk. Washoe and Clark being two of those, and as you know, that would be where the biggest need was, where they are a separate employee from the county clerk, because I tried to convince DOL that if the county clerk was an elected official, that the court clerk or the jury commissioner would count. They disagreed, especially when we found out that I believe it's Clark, Washoe, Churchill, Douglas, and I believe Lyon all have separate court clerk / jury commissioners that are employees of the judicial branch and not of the county clerks themselves. That disqualified those counties outright to receive the data, and we were ordered to cease that program. And that's where we're at on that. It's not something we took lightly. It's not something, frankly, that I wanted to do as a legal professional, but we were required to do so. It just isn't going to work under the current structure of our jury commissioners.
Is very interesting. And I'm so sorry to do this, but it is the nature of virtual meetings. Could you repeat your name again, either for the record or for me? I see a whole table full of people with masks on.
I'm sorry, Senator. It's Troy Jordan, Senior Legal Counsel to the Employment Security Division. Jordan is Jordan for the record.
And when you say the Department of Labor, do you mean the Federal Department of Labor?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That was very educational for me. I appreciate you going into so much detail and helping us understand that. Those are all my questions, Chair.
Thank you. We'll go to Senator Pickard, and Senator Lang, you're right after Senator Pickard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got a dozen questions that I won't ask. Let me just hit the important pieces, or the parts that I want to really get on the record. First, is there a reason that, and I don't know what other bills you may have proposed that I haven't seen, but we seem to be doing this kind of in a piecemeal effect rather than looking at, all of the different things that have been discussed, frankly. One of the things that I note is that we've got a third of the claimants are the 1099, the gig workers, and we don't seem to have addressed the issues with them at all. So I'm concerned that a third of our constituents aren't, we're not doing anything to help them. But is there another bill that's out there that we're just not aware of yet that would fix the rest of this? Or is this your one shot and we need to, this is all you're trying to correct this round?
Elisa Cafferetta for the record. As you know, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program is a brand new program that was implemented by Congress. And the rules and regulations are completely dependent on the guidance from the Federal Department of Labor. I'm fixing the problems is kind of a general comment. If there's something specific that you were expecting to see, that would be helpful, but we don't have other bills out there to, we certainly wish Congress would help us make this easier to implement. There is no doubt. However, we don't have anything else besides this bill, other than the budget bills, to address that. So,
all right,
maybe we can work out what your specific recommendations are that you were expecting to see.
Well, again, we could go on for some time. Let's not get into the specifics of what I think should be in a bill. We can do that offline, but let's focus on this bill. A couple of things. First, we've got in section 3, let me look at my notes, employees are not expressly given access to information on contributions made. Why or is that the intent? Is there a problem with letting the employee have access to their information, or is there something that I'm missing in terms of the authorization for access? Because we're cutting a whole lot of people out. We seem to be making the data less transparent. Can you tell me why why the bill doesn't allow employees access?
Jeff Frischman for the record. Let me clarify something and something that was said a little earlier to make sure that we're working on the same page here. The unemployment insurance program is funded based on contributions from employers. Employees do not contribute into the system. It is strictly a tax on employers. So many employees feel as though they've paid into the system where they really have not. So those contributions information is, they're not really paying for the payments to look at it. There's really not something for them to look at and say, my employer paid in X amount of money for me. That's really not the way that it's put together. It's not the way it works. It isn't a contribution on behalf of the employee, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and maybe it's been a while since I've studied my own pay stub, but I thought there was a deduction from my income for state unemployment insurance. So I would argue that any employer contribution ultimately is coming out of the pocket of the employee, if not somewhat indirect. But let's move on. We talked about the PUA, which I'm not sure I understand why that's separate since it's paid through the UI system. But when we're talking about overpayments to claimants, is there, my concern is that, or my understanding is that federal law requires a hearing, at least some level of due process before those claims are denied or withheld. Can you explain how this bill fixes that problem?
Jeff Frischman for the record. PUA is a federal program solely separate from unemployment insurance. The two programs work very differently. In order to be eligible for unemployment insurance, you must have earned covered wages for over a certain amount during the first 4 of the last 5 completed quarters. PUA is sole and separate. It's for independent contractors, and it's something we've never ever seen before. The PUA program has an end date on it. The end date, the original end date was, I believe, December 26th. That was extended, and you may remember it got kicked around a little bit on the federal level, and they ended up extending it through March. We're expecting to see it extended again. However, we don't know. So to put together any statutes or anything for that, this is a program that's fixing to end. It's a very short-term program. So I hope that answers your question on the difference between PUA and UI. Regarding the hearing process and such that you're referring to, let me explain basically how the system, the process works is that the division collects as much information as they can, typically from, in the world of UI, from an employer, where there is an employer, and from the claimant. Then we put together, and based on that information that we're able to collect, that fact finding, we issue a determination. That determination either denies the claim or pays the claim. Both parties in that process have the ability, and they are properly noticed, that they have the option to appeal that decision if they disagree with it. And then that position goes to our appeals tribunal. Ultimately, if they are still unhappy, either party with the appeals tribunal, the hearing is held. That is then kicked to Board of Review. Then it goes into the court system and theoretically can go up to the Supreme Court, the federal Supreme Court, theoretically. Now, in PUA, as that was set up, remember there's only one party in this because they're independent contractors, there is no employer. So when determinations are issued in PUA, they also have the ability, and there are certain timeframes required. If they disagree with that determination, they have the right to request an appeal. And we are in the process, and all of this had to be built because none of this existed on the PUA side prior to March of last year. So all of this had to be built, and that's the last step in the process. And as we put the modules together in order to build this program, this was the last module put in. So yes, they do have the right to an appeal. We are currently hearing PUA appeals. Yes, we have a backlog, but they are given the right to appeal once they receive that determination. I hope that answered your questions and responded to your concerns.
Sort of. I mean, I understand the difference between an appeal and the initial determination, but isn't it true that federal law requires a hearing before any payments are suspended? And at least what I'm getting from my constituents is they're saying that they were approved, but then they're not getting their payments. And then they get a letter saying that there is apparent fraud, so we're holding up. And I'm not suggesting, as Director Caffaretta said, we'd probably be breathing down your neck if we're finding out that you're paying all these apparent fraudulent claims. And I'm not suggesting that we go that far, but shouldn't there be a hearing before the determination is made that fraud exists, and so we're going to hold up the payment? I mean, isn't that required by federal law?
Jeff Frischman for the record. As you explained it, yes. However, regarding fraud, we can get into some terminology here. We cannot, the majority of what you and I and most logical people would call fraud, we would refer to as fraud, is, for instance, these imposter claims, stolen identity, that these claims are being filed. However, if you're asking about what the feds require, DOL requires us, in order to establish fraud, to be able to prove that, number one, it's willful, and number two, we have to talk to both parties. Well, it's impossible to talk to both parties when somebody is an imposter from living, whether they're in Europe or another state or another continent, to find these people to talk to. So we technically, under DOL, those are not considered fraud, which doesn't make sense. I agree, but
yeah, well, okay, and I don't mean to cut you short here, but I think you just highlighted just exactly the problem that my constituents are saying, which is they know who they are. You have an opportunity to learn who they are. Someone else, I mean, I had a claim that was filed in my name, and the only reason I found out about it was because I am my own employer, and I got the letter from Dieter saying, tell me about this unemployment claim. Well, I'm still employed, but at the end of the day, it's the James Ritchies of the world who call my office and say, I haven't previously submitted a claim, and they're telling me I did. How do I fix this? And yet there doesn't seem to be a process for that. And yet their claims were rejected, or at least they were postponed. They ultimately got it figured out, and he was very glad. He was very thankful for that. But this is the problem with the system as it exists today. People are not getting their benefits, and they're not getting a hearing. And I think that's violative of federal law under any construct. And I think we need to fix that first. Setting PUA aside, it's the UI claimants that aren't getting paid that need to be. And as the welfare services suggested, 814,000 people couldn't get their claims, so they went on welfare. Something's broken.
Jeff Frischman, for the record, let me just put to you that as far as imposter claims, right now, we have been able to deny and with great certainty stop claims on 244,000 claims that were filed. We currently have holds on approximately that many. So we're dealing with about 500,000 claims that we believe, half of them we're sure. There's another half, like I said, about 250,000 that are on hold. That's a major task to try to verify ID on each one of them, and we're doing a pretty darn good job of getting them done. But that's the pool you're talking about. And, yes, there are probably 10,000 claims or so in there that are real claims, but we're having to work through such a huge hit regarding fraud. This hit on fraud has really slowed down the entire process of being able to get these people paid. We want to get them paid, trust me, but we also don't want to send bad money out the door. And as Director Caporetto said earlier, we'll be answering those questions as well before too long.
And this is Elisa Cafaretta. If I could just add one thing. We do know that we are currently paying right around the neighborhood of 300,000 people weekly benefits, which is consistent with almost 20% unemployment. If the workforce is 1.5 million people, that's about 20% unemployment, which probably is reflective of people in both the employment situation and self-employed. So the idea that there are 800,000 people applying for welfare because they can't get unemployment benefits would imply that on top of the 20% unemployment, half of the workers in Nevada feel that they should be getting unemployment and are applying for welfare. Just on a logical sort of what's happening out there, that doesn't feel like it's an accurate set of numbers. So, we'd be happy to dig further into it and look at numbers with you, but I don't think that actually is sort of an accurate reflection of the need that half of the workforce is unemployed, can't get unemployment insurance, and so they're applying for welfare.
Sure.
So let me jump in. Let me jump in right away because we've got some people who want to testify, and out of courtesy for them, they've been waiting a couple hours now. Senator Pickard, can you take this offline with Director Caffaretta?
I certainly, Madam Chair. I just want to make sure that important statements are made on the record. Thank you.
Yeah, it's okay. I want to be conscious of the people who have been holding on the line and want to speak on the bill.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Committee members? Anyone else? Okay, so thank you all for the presentation, and what we will do now is we will go to testimony for people who want to support the bill.
Good morning.
And
to testify in support. Oh, I'm sorry, Chair.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And I just need to let everybody know, we will have a total of 20 minutes for each section. And ditto is a good response if someone's already said what you wanted to say. Thank you.
To testify in support of SB 75, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 575, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, my name is Michael Ross. I'm an entertainer here in Las Vegas. I've been here on one show for 8 years on a W-2. Been paying my taxes. I've done 1,600 shows. I'm the keyboardist for Raiding the Rock Vault. I lost my gig at the Rio because the governor shut us down. I got a denial letter. I called. I filed. It's 11 months now. I'm out of bagels. My cat's hungry, and my landlord's kicking me out of my place. I appreciate everything you guys are doing, but for just a musician, keyboardist, it's not filling my refrigerator. And on top of that, I am a diabetic, and you can look on my beautiful social media. I went into the hospital, and I had surgery last month, and I wouldn't be around if my fans didn't send me donations. So, yeah, I want you guys to hear from me. I'm Michael T. Ross. I want to get paid. I've been waiting on my appeals for months. I have approval letters. I have an attorney, and I've been waiting patiently. And there's no work for me. I'm a musician, I'm a diabetic, and I'm staying home until this virus goes away. But in the meantime, I want my benefits. Thank you for helping me today.
Caller with the last three digits of 260. Please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three digits of 260. Please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Adam Francis, ADAMFRANCIS. I'm here representing the people who are jobless and suffering unnecessarily due to DETR's failure to pay out eligible claims in a timely manner. I feel like claimants are lacking guidance, and this process is unnecessarily confusing. There's a disconnect between DETR and the claimant. I have personally experienced this, as I've continuously been told there are no longer any issues with my claim, and that I should continue to wait patiently as these cases are reviewed by an adjudicator in the order as received. However, my case was started in March. I still have not received a penny. I've watched many others who applied much later and have been paid. I've watched people who are fraudulent been paid. I personally feel the PUA process is lacking direction. Throughout this whole process, I've been given no guidance, nothing. I've called probably somewhere in the ballpark of 50 to 60 times. I've spoken to people who never give me any kind of answer. I get off the phone just as frustrated as I got on. And all of this came about because I could not prove who I was because I did not have my Social Security card. However, I did have a DD-214 from the United States Army, which is acceptable as a form of Social Security anywhere else in the world I've ever been.
So excuse me, caller. Excuse me, caller. Are you testifying in support of the bill? Are you in support of this bill?
No,
Pardon?
No.
Okay, well, we're doing support right now. We're doing. Yeah, opposition will come later after this.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Hang around for opposition, okay? For all those who are waiting on the phone, we are in support right now.
If you just recently joined us, we are in support of SB 75. To testify in support of SB 75, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, we have no callers in support at this time.
Thank you. So we'll move now to opposition. And the same rules will apply. We'll have 20 minutes for that, 2 minutes per speaker. And remember, ditto is a response that will allow more people to get in and make comments in opposition. So we're ready now for opposition. It's opposition only, not neutral. Opposition only. Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits of 577. Please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chris Bailey, B-A-L-Y, United Education Association. NSCA represents educators across the state, including many thousand education support professionals, or ESPs, who provide vital services to the children in Nevada public education system. ESPs perform a wide range of essential work, including nutrition services, instructional assistance, school secretaries, maintenance, operations, student transportation, and more. 9, 10, and 11-month education employees are not currently eligible to receive unemployment benefits in the coming months if they have a reasonable chance to be claimed for the next school year. Under normal circumstances, most ESPs have other employment opportunities during the summer. This income is vital, especially for those who make less than living wage during their working months. Unfortunately, with the COVID-19 pandemic, job opportunities last summer were severely limited, and many ESPs struggled to make ends meet. The likelihood of another summer with limited job opportunities due to the COVID-19 crisis would mean another summer with no income for thousands of Nevada educators. NSCA is seeking an amendment, SB 75, to allow education support specialists to be eligible for unemployment benefits during the summer. I know that this is not a money committee, but ultimately it's going to come down to money. And NSCA is very concerned about the dollars going to school districts. That's why we'll be out in front of the legislature in the 100 wearing red on Monday, talking about adequately funding public education. With that said, every dollar cost to the district for these unemployment benefits would be a dollar not in the pocket of a struggling educator over the summer. Here are the stories of the educators who were impacted last summer. Please committee consider this in. Thank you very much.
Caller that just spoke with the last three digits of 577, can you please spell and state your name for the record? We had a hard time hearing you.
Sorry, Chris Bailey, B-A-L-Y.
Thank you so much. Caller with the last three digits of 486, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, good morning. Alexander Marks, M-A-R-K-S, also with the Nevada State Education Association. You've no doubt received over 150, 160 emails over the last several days from ESPs throughout Nevada who support the amendment from NSCA to Senate Bill 75. ESPs are the backbone of the school districts, and with the NSCA's theme of listen to educators, I'd like to read just a few comments of the emails that were sent to you into the record. Quote, I was a school bus driver before the pandemic. I had to leave that job, a job I loved, because I could not get a second job over the summer and did not qualify for unemployment. Had I been able to draw unemployment, I would still be driving a school bus full-time rather than working elsewhere. With the shortages in the education field, not allowing 9 to 11-month employees to draw unemployment makes that shortage worse. We lose good folks by not adapting with the times. Another story. I'm at a loss for words. My husband has been unemployed for 11 months and still waiting for unemployment. We're just now finding work for him. Our savings are gone. We're living paycheck to paycheck. Jobs were hard to find in the summer, and I was unable to work my regular summer job due to COVID. CCSD did not allow me to collect unemployment. I've received the vaccine, so hopefully I'll be able to find a position this year in the summer, but who knows what the market will be like. If all else fails, please allow me and many others like me to collect unemployment for just the 2 months at the very least to stay afloat. So whether we're saying backbone or lifeblood, ESPs make our schools run. From fixing kids' cuts and scrapes to keeping our schools safe, they do it all. We ask that you adopt this amendment so that they can make a living wage. I think we owe that to them. And like my colleague said, what might look good, what looks good on paper doesn't necessarily look good in the real world. And every dollar that is in the district's pocket is a dollar that is not being used to buy food or rent for our members. The state district got help, ESPs did not, and that is why we're offering this amendment. Thank you.
So caller, let me be clear. You will not support the bill as written, but you will support it with the amendment. So this is opposition?
Yes,
Hello?
we just want to make sure that, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
it was clicking over. Just because as written, we're supporting an amendment to that. That was why we're at the opposition table.
Okay, yeah, I need to be clear because we're in opposition. And so if the bill as it's currently written, are you in opposition or are you for it?
We would be in opposition because we want this amendment included in it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the clarity.
No problem. Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits of 896, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning. This is Sue Mateska, attorney with the law firm of Dyer Lawrence and legal counsel for the Nevada State Education Association. My last name is spelled Matuska. As Mr. Daly and Mr. Marks just indicated, we have a proposed amendment in, and I'm here to just walk through the committee through that. The amendment that we have proposes to eliminate the language in current statute which requires denial of unemployment benefits for the non-professional employees between academic terms or on recesses for holiday. So our amendment proposes to amend the NRS sections which are already being amended in the bill in Section 6 and Section 7. Those sections presently refer to those who engage in instructional, research, or principal administrative or other service or other capacity, and that refers to the non-professionals or support staff employees. So our amendment proposes to remove the language referencing the other service and other capacity employees so that there would no longer be a flat-out prohibition on providing those benefits to these non-professional employees. And this is consistent with federal law, which does give the states the discretion regarding the non-professional employees. Happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you. Thank you. And so again, for clarity, opposition unless the amendment is adopted. And anyone else who's going to speak in opposition, please make that plain. If you're in opposition, you're in opposition unless something else is adopted. So we can make sure that we have the record correct, okay? Thank you, ma'am. Broadcast, next.
Caller with the last three digits of 536. Please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Can you hear me?
Caller, we can hear you now.
My name is Jason Gately, Gatley. I'm calling and speak to opposition to the bill unless the NSCA amendment that has been proposed is added. And I'd just like to address a couple of comments that during the recent year when pandemic unemployment assistance was passed by the federal government, it was created for those that are not traditionally eligible for unemployment. My understanding is it was that we didn't leave any citizens hurt by the pandemic by no fault of their own behind. What has happened is that 9-month employees, school bus drivers, and 10 and 11-month employees were left out of the system, support professionals. And during this time, you had low-wage earners unable to find work, unable to collect unemployment during the summer months, and left struggling and starving by themselves. And I would like to see that in this bill that issues like that get corrected. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Callers left on the line, we're down now to about 7 minutes for this section. So if you can use brevity, and again, if someone has already said what you wanted to say, ditto is all right. Broadcast. Do we have additional callers?
I'm so sorry, Chair. We had a couple of technical difficulties.
Any more callers in opposition?
Caller with the last three digits of 700, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Brian Wachter, BryanWachter. I serve as the Senior Vice President of the Retail Association of Nevada. I want to thank you, Chair Spearman, and members of the Senate Committee on Commerce and Labor Rand stands opposed to Senate Bill 75. We're even more opposed to it with the proposed amendment. The Unemployment Trust Fund was one of the few portions of DETR that was working as intended and expected during these trying times. The trust fund is strong, and one of the reasons for its strength is how well the current system balances the need for a strong fund and the need for business to be able to hire the employees that they need to survive and expand. This process, or this new bill, would make this process much more complicated. There aren't any good taxes, but the very worst ones are overly complicated to comply with and pay, and they increase the cost of government to be able to administer such a complicated process. We specifically disagree with building in 3 peaks or 20 years as far too long and a needless attempt to increase rates in a non-century defining economic condition. While the COVID pandemic is unique in modern history, the sudden need to utilize the trust fund in excess of its current assets is not new, and many of you on this committee were here during the Great Recession when business and DETR worked together to restore confidence and liquidity in the trust fund. The mechanism that was utilized the last time Nevada was forced to borrow money from the federal government was clean, easy to understand, and as temporary as the situation called for. We've heard from DETR that the trust fund was robust. We adamantly disagree that the policy choice of the legislature should be to attempt to avoid any loan from the federal government. At a time when DETR has been unable to stop hundreds of thousands of Nevadans from having fraudulent claims filed on their behalf, when DETR struggled to allocate funds from the trust fund, and when businesses are struggling and operating at reduced capacity for the foreseeable future, now is not the time to quickly and without proper vetting completely change and make more complicated the process for deciding the rate of unemployment insurance. The Retail Association of Nevada is committed to doing our part to contribute to a strong and vibrant trust fund that provides employees with the assurances that they require that the funds will be available when they're needed. The current system does that. Senate Bill 75 is a solution in search of a problem, and we would...
Thank you, Mr. Walker, and submit the rest of the testimony in writing, and we'll make sure that it's part of the record. Thank you so much.
If you just recently joined us, we are currently in opposition of Bill SB 75. To testify in opposition of SB 75, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
And this will be the last caller. We only have 2 minutes left on this section. We reached 20 minutes.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 815, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Tyler Winkler, G-Y-L-E-R-W-I-N-K-L-E-R. I'm an attorney at the Legal Aid Center of Southern Nevada. I am speaking in opposition specifically to Section 2 of SB 75 relating to the alternate base period. We would support the rest of this bill if this change were removed, and we're hopeful we can work with Ms. Elisa Caparetta to ensure access to unemployment assistance isn't reduced at a time when people need it most. The alternative base period simply allows workers to use earnings from a more recent working period to be considered so they can get benefits sooner at the time they become unemployed. These workers have sufficient earnings to qualify for unemployment, but without the alternative base period, might need to wait for up to 6 months before their earnings can be counted. Denying unemployment to otherwise eligible workers under the traditional base period test undermines the goal of unemployment insurance. For example, Legal Aid Center worked with an unemployment claimant in March of 2020 after she'd been laid off due to the pandemic. She had been denied unemployment benefits due to her lack of work history in her base period. This was because she was on leave the first 3 quarters of her base period due to pregnancy complications. When she came back to work after her maternity leave, she was then soon laid off due to the COVID-19 shutdown. She was a single mother with a new baby and had no family to assist her with her expenses. With the alternative base period, she was able to receive benefits to support her and her daughter until her work reopened. Another client was on disability leave during the first 2.5 quarters of her base period due to hip replacement surgery and recovery. She returned to work full-time the quarters before the COVID-19 shutdown closed her business. She was denied under her original base period, but with the alternative base period was able to get benefits until her business reopened. Without the alternative base period, these individuals and many others would not have received assistance when they did. While reviewing an unemployment applicant's alternative base period requires some additional administrative time and cost, they are not substantial and they are more than justified considering the long way The alternative base period goes to provide immediate relief to workers who need to pay their bills. In addition, reverting to only the... Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You can submit the rest of your testimony in writing. Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone who has taken the time to comment in this section. We will now move to neutral. Neutral.
To testify neutral on SB 75, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, to testify neutral on SB 75, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 802, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Amber Hansen, AmberHansen. I'm basically been running a large 19,000 claimant PUA pandemic Facebook group. And first and foremost, I want to commend, obviously, Dieter and Caffaretta for taking on such an arduous task. But there are some things that I feel that are representative of things that are not necessarily being discussed today about claimants that are stuck in loopholes, those that have potentially legitimate claims that are stuck in appeals, those who have never received a dime. And while I know that fraud is a priority and again commend the work that's been done to try to combat that fraud, we cannot continue to keep negating the fact that there are many Nevadans that are in fact eligible for this program and do need to speak to a human being and be treated with the dignity and respect that they deserve. We were asked to stay home for Nevada. We were asked to shut our businesses down. We were asked to do all of these things and we complied. And we would like nothing more than for Dieter to continue to be doing the work that it's done and also continue to take into the considerations the recent report of Barbara Buckley, which I had worked with her in conjunction with the strike force in providing claimant feedback on what was happening on the claimant end. I also worked with Jason Guanasso on the report that he wrote, again providing claimant feedback. I know that Ms. Caffaretta has expressed that that was a valuable resource, and I would love to see that continue to be pipelined so we can collectively work on these issues and it be a neutral conversation with both sides and not just Dieter speaking to claimants as if there is a lack of compassion and empathy for their circumstances, as many have expressed today in this meeting that their constituents tell them an exact opposite story of what is being reported today. But I appreciate and respect, again, what was reported today.
Caller, your time is up.
Thank you.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 124, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits of 124, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes. Please begin.
Good morning, Chair Spearman, Paul Moradkin, Moradkhan, with the Vegas Chamber. The Chamber is currently neutral as we look to fully understand how Senate Bill 75 would impact our members in proposed sections 1 and 14. I would like to thank the Director Dieter for speaking with me yesterday regarding the bill and appreciate her time, of course. As an informational component, the Chamber did support the assessment that was levied in 2013 to help repay the balance to the federal government. If I'm not mistaken, that took about 4 years and was an expedited process to stabilize and repay the federal government. The solvent fund was extremely solvent in preparation
for economic downturn in January 2020. There was a little over $2 billion in the fund. So the chamber does believe, as a policy, the fund has been operating as it should, and we continue to continue our dialogue with Peter to address any concerns that may emerge from the chamber. Thank you, Madam Chair, for your time today.
Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits of 610, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
First name Thea, Thea. Last name Bell, B as in boy, ELL. Thank you for taking the time to hear my thoughts. I would like to preface by saying my comment isn't related to this bill. However, I feel it needs to be said. Currently, when a PUA claimant calls the PUA phone line, the person that they talk to only has the ability to put notes on their claim and quote unquote escalate it to adjudication. And so nothing gets done. And it doesn't seem to really get escalated to adjudication. So whenever we call, if somebody that answers the phone could actually do anything on the claim or make any changes or anything like that, actually handle the reason why we called, then we wouldn't have all the problems and delays and anger and frustration that we're having now. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits of 504, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Brittany Sheehan, BRITTANY, SHEEHAN. My comment is about how inappropriate 20 minutes of public comment in opposition is, and the manner that we're doing this is truly an embarrassment to the right of Nevadans to have their voices heard, and I yield the rest of my time. Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits of 232, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Jan, Jan Giles, Giles. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jan Giles. I'm the president of the Education Support Employees Association, which represents education support professionals in Clark County. ESEA is concerned about the impact of the summer unemployment for our 9, 10, and 11-month education support professionals. So we are asking for you to support the amendment for SB 75 to allow ESPs to receive unemployment benefits during the summer months. Most educators are ineligible for unemployment during summer months, and many rely on additional income during the summer months simply to make ends meet. I'd like to share one story from an ESP in Clark County. They are a specialized program teacher assistant for CCSD, and during the summer months, they applied for extended school year work, but due to the pandemic, they were not able to work. They are a single woman who is struggling to make ends meet and have had no income during the last summer. They suffered because they couldn't apply for unemployment under the pandemic relief programs, and due to the assurance of return to work, they were not eligible. Their food ran short all summer, and it was impossible to catch up with their bills and mortgage. It was an extreme hardship to them and others like them with the stay-at-home order and other circumstances last summer. Unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, job opportunities for them have been limited, and they need your help. They are not hopeful they will see anything different this summer. This is just one of hundreds of stories from our educators across the state. Job opportunities this summer have a high probability of being just as bad this summer. Education support professionals are the heartbeat and the backbone of our school district, and they need your help. School districts need these dedicated, experienced workers who care about students. This amendment could make all the difference in the world, and I ask that you adopt it. Thank you.
Caller with the last three digits of 371, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Okay, sorry, I had to figure out how to unmute with a phone. My name is Tony Duncan, Toni Duncan. I'm part of Amber Hanson's collective. I was ineligible for regular unemployment before COVID even happened since 2019. I was about to start a job working for the census, and then everything closed down. I'm a single mom of 2 kids, a former foster youth with nowhere to go. If you know the rates of homelessness in Nevada and how they reflect in foster youth, it's kind of a big deal that I'm not getting anything from PUA. I received multiple letters saying that I'm eligible, that I should be getting it. Every time I call, they say that I was denied on accident. I had all of my information already uploaded showing that I was ineligible for regular unemployment. However, like one of the other ladies said, whenever you call, all they can do is escalate you. I've been told to wait on my appeals to go through. I appealed August 7th. I know in our collective, we saw that a lot of us were all denied on that same day. And so I mentioned that to a PUA representative, and they said it must have been an error. To have been waiting and never received anything from PUA, but to constantly be told that, oh, you were denied an error, but you still have to wait for an appeal to go through, that I've been sitting in appeals since August 7th is kind of frustrating. I don't know what to do. And I just felt that needed to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 487. Please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning. My name is Dawn Echeverry, DAWNETCHEVERRY. I've been a teacher teaching music in Washoe County for 27 years, and I'm currently serving as the Vice President of the Nevada State Education Association. I am calling in neutral out of concern for my ESPs. Last March, when school shut down, the support staff still went to work. Food service workers quickly developed a plan to make sure children who depended on them for meals were still receiving meals. Parapros made sure that every child in the school had the supplies they needed to continue their learning. While attending Zoom, Team, or Meets with their students they worked with every day in the classroom. Bus drivers delivered their meals, supplies, and parked their buses in locations so students could link into Wi-Fi. In May, these same employees seeked summer employment working with many of the same children they work with during the school year. Our ESPs work in summer learning programs, city rec camps, boys and girls clubs, and the list goes on. But last May, those jobs and other summer employment opportunities were not there. The employees who made sure Nevada's children's needs were met were left to figure out how to feed their families and make their bills. Being an ESP is more than a job, it's their passion. And it's time that we take care of them and make sure that they do not have to choose between their families and Nevada's families again. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me give a little bit of clarity. We're in neutral now, and neutral means you don't have a comment for or an opposition to the bill. If there is a story that you want to tell or give anecdotal information, please hold your comments until we get to public comments. So neutral is, I'm coming to speak with no opinion. And anything other than that is public comment. Now we'll have time for that too. So I think we've got about 4 minutes left. That's 2 more speakers broadcast.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 636. Please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
My name is Chastity Luke, CHASSIDY LUKE. And I'm calling because this issue hasn't been addressed. And thank you, senators, for listening. In Las Vegas, we all have 2 jobs, and I work for the school system. And I work the minimum 4 days a month and was a gig worker full time. So because of the limbo between the PUA and the regular UI, they made me go back reclaim all for UI. Now I'm stuck owing both, and it took 7 months to get an appeal. I'm a single mother. I'm trying my best, and I feel that Dieter has really let down so many people. And I apologize, I'm crying, but this has been such an emotional journey with Dieter, and I want to thank Barbara Buckley for having a voice for everyone as well. And I hope that PUA and Dieter address that most people that live in this town have 2 jobs, and we were greatly affected by this as a community. So I'm speaking for the single moms and dads out there who are struggling every day to do the best they can for their children. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. 1 minute left.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 809. Please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 1 minute and may begin.
My name is Jen DeMoss, JenDemoss, and I really don't have an opinion on either way it goes. I really don't. The only thing My name is Jen DeMoss, JenDemoss, and I really don't have an opinion on either way it goes anymore. I really don't. The only thing that I just would like to point out is that unemployment today sat here in the meeting and said that before all of this pandemic thing started, that it was going great, that they were having no issues. So why are they today here trying to amend and change things that only concern regular unemployment? Because eventually the pandemic is not going to be here anymore. So I just think it's insulting and a shame that they're only trying to change the things that they brought up today and not trying to do anything to solve the issues. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, callers. Thank you for taking the time to voice your opinion. And let me just state for the record that we do not have an interminable amount of time, and there are other committees that have to meet, and so we must have time constraints. Anyone who wants to testify and make their opinion known, there are ways that you can do it. You can always fax or email your testimony to the committee. So if you did not have an opportunity to speak today, your voice can still be heard. Simply send an email or a fax. You can also go on the website and there's an opinion, opinion button that you can push. And so that's the reason that we have to have time constraints. We cannot go on for 8, 9, or 10 hours because there are people that have other meetings and people that are waiting and want to do other things too. So hope you all will understand that. Thanks so much. We'll close now. Opposition. Senator Lang, you had a question. Is that related to the bill? I want to get that in before I close the hearing on the bill.
Thank you, Chair Spearman. I am meeting with the director next week and we'll discuss it.
Thank you. So if there are no other comments, then I'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 75. And I think that would be a good idea, Director Caffaretta, and you and your staff, to meet with those who are in opposition and had submitted amendments. Let's see if you can work them out, work it out before we do work session. There may be a happy medium. So if you all can just get together and figure out how to get to go, I certainly would appreciate that. Would like to work session this though before the middle of session. So please do that as expeditiously as you can. Thanks so much. We will now go to public comment, and public comment, 2 minutes, and we will take 10 minutes for that. And public comment is not commenting on the bill. Public comment is public comment about something else. So.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 260. Please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin. Again, that's caller with the, there we go. Go ahead.
Adam Francis, FRANCIS. This entire presentation today has been difficult to listen to, frankly. Nothing short of putting lipstick on a pig. I applied in March. I haven't received a dime. Apparently they could not verify my identity. I've uploaded over 30 documents to prove my identification. The only document I was short was the actual Social Security card itself, which my DD-214, my separation papers from the United States Army, are a legal document that can take the place of a Social Security card anywhere else in the world. It took me months to get an actual Social Security card due to COVID. Now that I have one in, it's been months, and all I'm told is that it's been escalated to adjudication, which we just heard a girl speak on that. So I won't go any further on that. It's the same issue. It's been escalated, but nothing happens. So here I sit since March with no money and not really an idea of what to do next. And all I'm told is that I have the option to appeal, but there's no issues on my account. So why is nothing being done? Why am I not just being approved? I'm a U.S. vet. I have all my documents in. There's nothing wrong with my case. It even says online there are no issues. Why am I not being approved? Why am I not getting paid? People are struggling. There's people out there that have been pushed so low that they're committing suicide over this. And Dieter just is up there. They're up there today laughing and joking like they had a great time in 2020 and they did great things. Apparently they saw a different 2020 than the rest of us. They're doing so well with fraud.
Caller, your 2 minutes
your
are up.
attention elsewhere.
Thank you, sir. You can submit the rest of that in writing via email or fax. Thank you so much.
We are currently in public comment. If you would like to testify under public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 653, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, good morning, Chairman Spearman and the rest of the committee. This is Dora, like the Explorer, D-O-R-A, Martinez, M-A-R-T-I-N-E-Z. I am speaking towards the theater, especially the voc rehabilitation programs for people who are blind and disabled. I have been I graduated since 3 years ago, and they have not helped with my employment. We tried the 700-hour system, and they do not know how to help people who are visually impaired or people with disability. I think that they should have a sensitivity training to train their employee to how to help people with disability and to help them find a job. And also, my friend who's also have a disability has been trying to get on the PUA because her husband was laid off work. They had COVID, and he is not able to get PUA. So that's my comment, and thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 575, please slowly spell and state your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, my name is Michael Ross. I spoke earlier today. My apology for speaking again, but I'm going to keep speaking. I'm not going to sit here anymore and be silent for 11 months because I don't have my apartment anymore to sit here with. And I'm going to keep speaking. I want to go to the news. I came from California 10 years ago as a musician because I believe in Nevada, the best state in the country. And I'm a musician. I'm not secondhand. I work my butt off in this town and give love and light and smile and give that beautiful talent to the rest of the country and the world. That's why they want to come here, to be entertained. Don't leave us out. I'm Michael T. Ross. Look me up and hit that pay button. I have denial letters. Now I have approval letters. I did everything I needed to do. And I want to close with thank you, Amber Hansen. If it wasn't for her, I'd be lost in what's going on over there because it sounds like a bunch of mumbo jumbo to me. Fill my fridge, give me my insulin, give me my benefits, and you guys will be relying on me when those doors open to bring that business back into town. I'm going to be up there shaking my ass, and I'm going to be there. But I want my money.
Excuse me, caller. We will not use profane language. We will not use profane language.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm sorry.
And you only have about 30 seconds left.
Okay, I apologize for that. I'm in distress. You can catch me on another day. We can be happy together, but not today. Please help me. Help us, entertainers who are approved and haven't been paid in 11 months. Hit that button and get me out of your hair and let me get back on stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Broadcast, anyone else in the queue? We have 3 minutes left on public comment.
To testify in public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, you have no one left in public comment.
Thank you, ma'am. I want to thank everyone who took the time to comment, either affirmative, opposition, neutral, and in public comment. I recognize that this particular time in our country's history is perilous, to say the least. And I know that the people who are trying to fix this and get this right are doing the very best that they can, and I'm sure that they will take all the suggestions and the comments that have been made under advisement. And having said that, we will. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Lang. Did I get to you?
I'm good, Chair.
Okay. All right. Just want to make sure I didn't miss anyone. And so with that, we will adjourn this session of the Senate Committee on Commerce and Labor. Thank you all.